That's like that's the hipster cloth tie.
All right. Good morning, everyone. We have 3 items before our joint PHED and Education Culture Committee. Today, we're going to begin with a review of the NDA for Worksource Montgomery. And we have joining us Executive Branch and Worksource Montgomery. Welcome back, Tom Street. Nice to see your smiling face. We have Ellie and Shane and Jerome and Parfin and I'm sorry, Camille McKenzie. Welcome. Thank you. So, Gene, why don't you please get us started?
Sure. So the executive's recommendation for the Worksource Montgomery NDA in fiscal 20 is $1,809,594, which is the same as fiscal 19. Worksource Montgomery is the county's workforce development corporation. They implement the county's policies for workforce development. The council had a very robust conversation in March regarding this organizations and their implementation, and so staff's not going to review that. The budget also includes, our Worksource's budget also includes, not in this NDA, but $80,000 in the Department of Corrections for the jail center, the job center in the correction facility. That is also included in Worksource's budget. So the total budget for Worksource then proposed in the executive's recommended budget is $1.88 million. Council staff's approach to this was to look at programs based on the March 5th conversation that the county's funding supports, to make sure that the council understands what that money is supporting and whether those programs are fully funded or need to be augmented based on the committee's recommendation. But before I get into each of those programs, I thought we'd give a moment for Dr. Giles to share anything she wishes regarding Worksource's budget and or their operations for the coming year.
Sounds good. Mr. Fletcher.
Yes, greetings. Good morning, Chairman and council members. Thank you for having us here on behalf of County Executive Mark Elrick and Chief Administrative Officer Andrew Klein. We are excited to present the budget that we have submitted before you. We believe that the programs and the results that Ellie Giles is going to discuss are going to be well-deserved and well-representative of your desire to make sure the needs of the residents of this county are served. From our standpoint as the administration, we want to let you know that we believe that there's a stronger level of accountability that is going to occur in fiscal year 20. We are all committed to make sure that we play the role that is necessary to ensure that the services and the needs are met. From my standpoint, myself and my colleagues stand ready. Also, we want to let you know that the Worksource Montgomery Board of Development has been united, and they stand as well to make sure that we all stand in a line of accountability to make sure that Worksource Montgomery achieves this outcomes, one that we all share to make sure, again, that the county is well served. One of the major items of conversation has been the hire centers versus the AJCs. Internally, as well as with Worksource Montgomery, we've had some very good, robust, and passionate conversations about what that looks like. And we can assure you that in fiscal year 20, the model will be designed to make sure that the characteristics of the nationally recognized model of the AJCs that happened in the near past are replicated, and more services and better services are provided for the needs of the underserved in the community. We also want to let you know that recently, we received an opinion from our county attorney's office regarding the WIOA funding. Myself, with the board of Worksource Montgomery, as well as with Ellie, are going to make sure that we explore all of those options and those avenues to make sure that, as Director Green has pointed out, that the funding can be used. We are going to make sure that we explore that and make sure that everything comes to light and there is a synergy and a sense of collaboration between what our county attorney's office believes and what they can actually provide. In wrapping up, I would like to say we're looking forward to fiscal year 20. We believe that with increased communication, not only between ourselves, but with you and your colleagues, that we can make sure that workforce development in the county is improved.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Ellie?
Good morning. Thank you so much for the invitation to present today. I first want to thank the members of our executive committee and board, Aaron Allen, Leslie Weber, Don Wegman, Tom Street, and David Petter, all representing our board today. Under our new United Board structure, FY 2019 has been very, very productive. Since we met on March 5th, WorkSource Montgomery has sent you documents responding to your questions, and we have met with each of you or your staff to enhance communication and collaboration. We are a growing organization amongst a rapidly changing environment. We are solution-oriented and dedicated to our mission to connect opportunities with demand. I am very, very proud of the accomplishments of our organization and the incredible team. With an emphasis on program services, our team is small and dedicated. Utilizing collaborative partnerships, we have created programs to address career awareness, youth career awareness, career pathways, talent pipelines in high-demand industries, specialized demographics programs such as older workers, disabilities, veterans, family-centered, or what used to be referred to as 2Gen services, just to name a few. We are excited about our newest partnership with Interfaith Works to support our higher centers. And later on, Shane will talk a little bit, Shane Rock, our executive director here, will talk about his experience with WorkSource Montgomery and our convening role, and outline our joint efforts to create a foundation for a workforce system that is modeled after the Washington State model that Shane was very involved with in the past. So we're going to be able to use his expertise there. We have met with community groups and have worked with leadership to create connections and programs focused on closing the gap between demand and quality skilled workers. That is a shared problem across the nation. Camille McKenzie, the Director of Talent Solutions, will share our strategies for closing that gap with the job centers and the hire centers. These strategies produce customer-focused services rather than eligibility screenings. No customer is turned away as we connect them with the right services. We have established ourselves as a go-to organization with our employers, especially our small businesses. The success has come with strong collaboration and partnerships. In other words, when all of the stakeholders are in the arena, making courageous decisions and focusing on outcomes. Challenges occur when communication falters and commitment wanes. The partners that have been successful with us are the ones that are active participants, not the spectators. In expanding our role as a convener in the workforce system, we continue to work with a vast amount of organizations that develop a united and shared vision. However, it's going to take a community of providers to be successful, not isolated programs. We are very excited about the direction of the county, the new directions, and we look forward to continued collaboration with you to enhance the workforce system. So I'm going to defer now to Shane for just a second and let him talk.
And please feel free to interrupt me at any point. It's a pleasure to be here this morning talking with you. Interfaith Work, I'm Shane Rock, CEO of Interfaith Works. We have a very strong interest in collaborative approaches to employment in the county. WEO is a wonderful approach from the federal government for certain people who are readily employable in a short period of time. But we have many people in this county, as you know, who are struggling, particularly on the east side of the county and up county, who may not speak English as their primary language, who have obstacles to employment in their lives. They don't have childcare, they have other things they're dealing with. Interfaith Works has an approach that is very effective in working with these populations, providing one-on-one job readiness training and one-on-one professional or mentoring by retired professionals who are trained in providing support. We have a job placement rate of 65 to 70%, working with people, primarily people who were formerly homeless or experiencing homelessness now. So we're working with the hardest to employ. The takeaway from that approach is, for people who have not been employed in their lives or who have not been employed in a long time or have substantial obstacles, a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. And so you have to provide customized one-on-one support to those families and those people to enable them to seek employment or to become employed and to retain employment. When we employ someone, we stay with them for an entire year to ensure they stay in that job. And after 6 months, our retention rate so far this year is 77%. So what we're trying to do here on a system-wide basis, Ellie and I started talking probably a year and a half ago or more about how to change the system in the county to reach more people who have not been able to benefit from our economy. And so what we're trying to do is borrow some of the incredible collaborative leadership that was established in Washington State, particularly in the program called LEP Pathways, Limited English Proficiency Pathways. The idea there was to bring together the work source community, the employment offices, with the community colleges, particularly the welcome back centers for refugees and immigrants to help them recertify in the professions they had overseas, and the community-based organizations, the nonprofits. And so that system was intentionally developed so that all of those components were linked with a common database system, common outcomes, and common purpose in approaches, so that all of those sectors working together. Someone could come into my office at Interfaith Works, if the system were implemented fully here, and access the job availability listings at through WorkSource Montgomery, could enroll in any offered programs at WorkSource Montgomery without even having to visit a WorkSource Montgomery office. The idea is to really make employment customer friendly and effective in the shortest period of time possible. So we at Interfaith Works are welcome WorkSource's focus on more community-based solutions, welcome their spirit of collaboration and convening, and the fact that they're putting out a lot more information to nonprofits like Interfaith Works that we can use to help employ people. I think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Tom, were you also going to present?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of wrap up a little bit in that I was around when this organization was founded, and it has I want to remind the council, it's got a threefold mission. One is to meet the needs of business, one is to serve the unemployed and underemployed, and third is to create career pathways for individuals that will result in sustaining careers. I think over the last, the organization hasn't even been in existence 3 years yet, but and we've had a lot of governance issues that we've had to work through, and I think have those issues behind us. I think that it's really working very collaboratively with Department of Health and Human Services, Montgomery County Public Schools, Montgomery College, USG, and our faith nonprofit organizations to develop a overall system, as others have said here. And we need to create, as a result of this, we believe in 2020, we're going to create an outcome-based system that not only meets the needs of county residents to seeking careers and jobs, but also meet the labor needs of business, which is critical to creating and continuing a vibrant business community and a growing economy. And we have to remember it's creating that balance between these different interests that's so important for the council to remember, is that while the unemployed and underemployed is a critical need, especially in our community, we also have to pay attention to the needs of the biotech, high-tech businesses that will really grow our economy, which will create the tax base to further our social programs.
Okay. Okay, Ms. McKenzie?
Hello, my name's Camille McKenzie, Director of Talent Development with WorkSource Montgomery, and what I wanted to speak about is we are implementing, as you heard before, our hire centers. And with the hire centers, it's more of a how can we help you approach versus a what do you qualify for approach. With hire, every job seeker that comes in and requests services, we're able to connect them to something, whether it be an employment opportunity, a training opportunity, a resource to help them become more employable. We are currently implementing our hire program in various libraries throughout the county, and one of the things that we found is a lot of times job seekers go to other resources and other places to look for employment, whether it be due to location, transportation, whatever their reasons are. They're not coming to the job center, so we feel let's go to them, let's bring the opportunities to them, let's try to engage them where they are, where they're already convening, whether it be at libraries, whether it be at community events, anything of the sort. We try to reach them where they are. are. One of the other things that we also are doing within our job centers are promoting events for job seekers of various interests. We have multiple events even taking place today. We have a robust calendar of events for job seekers from entry-level positions all the way up to the higher, more biotech positions. And we pride ourselves on being able to have something for everyone regardless of skill levels.
Okay, good. Thank you for that background comments. I'll invite my colleagues to share background comments as well. If we want to talk about specific budget issues, we'll get to that in the course of the packet, but it's a good time for sort of overviews. Mr. Rice, co-chair of the committee meeting today.
Well, thank you, and it's interesting. I wasn't going to say anything in opening until I heard Mr. Street comment, and then sparked my interest a bit. So let me start with you, sir. You said something very interesting about how the council needs to remember that you are charged with a three-tiered approach. Let me just say that 2/3 of those tiers involve employees, and so you need to remember that the focus is on employees and getting people employed, while yes, a subset is to make sure that we're providing resources for these companies. The key and the crux of this is about making sure that we have underemployed and unemployed people connected to jobs. That is the primary 2/3 focus of what your charge is. And so I just want to make sure, because, you know, when folks tell me what I need to remember, I want to make sure that folks understand what they just said and what I hope you remember your charge is as a part of this board and what it is. Because if that's not the focus of WorkSource Montgomery, then maybe we need to move in a different direction. So let me make sure that that's clear first.
I think we're on the same page.
Okay.
And I believe that this team, this staff, is the right staff to implement your priorities.
Okay. So let me say this. When I look at the hire center piece, and so Ms. McKenzie, you had brought up about the hire center piece, and I'm looking at Circle 19, where we look at hire center outputs. And I see from our EC Regional Center, our White Oak Library, our Burtonsville Library, Rockville Library, and you've provided one-to-one career coaching and employer engagement and workshops. What I don't see is jobs. What I don't see, and so again, you don't have to answer right now. It's just for future. When you're coming to present to us, that's what we're most concerned about. Those other things are great, and they're good, but at the end of the day, just as what we saw in East County, when it came to the fact that we didn't have any production of actual jobs, we did a lot of work, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, those things, that's what we need to see. You have a comment.
Okay, and I can say that, just because I recently did our report for the last quarter, we obtained over 20 employed customers that obtained employment within East County. We worked with the new hotel that just opened up, the Home 2 Suites. We were able to get them staffed. We did more than 75% of the staffing for the whole hotel. And we are working with the construction company that is doing the work right in front of the regional center. And we are engaging a lot of the businesses. And we have an event taking place May 11th to engage more of the businesses in the neighborhood for the job seekers within the community.
Now, I do know, just to be fair, that Jay Rubenda, who's done a lot of work, was actually a key partner and a key institutor in that happening. So while I know it was a shared collaborative, I do know, I talked to Jay Ru a lot, that was a lot of his initiative in terms of making those connections, and he was the one who actually suggested that you talk to them. So from that perspective, while it's good, again, those are the kinds of things that I'd like to see overarching. So let me just say this about WorkSource as a whole. And I understand that there are, there's limits in terms of WIOA, in terms of what you can do and those kinds of things. That's fine. Just let us know. If there's something that doesn't tie, that we still want to see happen, that you can't do with WIOA funding, just let us know. And we'll back out that funding and make sure that we put it to where we want. Because what I want to make sure that folks understand is that this partnership means that the council still has initiatives and a direction that we want to go in, right? So when we are investing our money, we know that there's other money that's invested too, but when we're investing our money, we have a direction, an idea, and a vision of where we want to go. And so it's not necessarily always tied into where the board or other folks may want to go as well, right? We represent the greater community as a whole, the taxpayers, and so we have to make sure that we're shepherding that money in a way in which we think is going to be appropriate and most effective. And so from that standpoint, there will be conflict. There will be differences of opinion. And in those kind of cases, what I ask is that you just communicate those up front so that we know in those situations where we can provide the appropriate funding or pull out and use other vehicles in which to support those particular areas. I think that has created some of the growing pains, and as you said, Mr. Street, over the past 3 years, that's the reason why I don't think we've gotten the results that we want to have on a myriad of levels. Not to say that there haven't been successes, and there have been. I mean, the creation of Summarize and the very start of that program and your dedication to that at the beginning, Ellie, has just been tremendous. So there are great things that we've seen that have happened, but there have also been disappointments too, right? And that's what happens in starting a fledgling entity. But I think that the other piece of it that contributes is also that there are differing visions. And I think that at some point we're going to have to start to diverge in terms of things that WSM does well and is aligned with where they are, and other things that the county council sees as a direction that we need to head in. So that's just a precursor for some of the conversations that we're about to have, and I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair.
All right, I've got Council President Navarro, followed by Councilmember Jawanda, followed by Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I want to really echo what my colleague was just referring to, and I do want to express my appreciation to Mr. Rock for all the work that you've continued to do. I know, Mr. Fletcher, you're quickly getting into understanding part of what it is that we're trying to achieve, and I think it's also important to articulate that the reason why I am really thrilled to, be on this council at this moment in time is because I think that we have reached a very important moment where our vision, our collective vision, it's very aligned. We have struggled for many years to get to a point of really assessing the strategic direction of this county. At the same time, we have acknowledged very openly, a conversation that some folks in some jurisdictions are afraid to have, which is who we are in Montgomery County. It is a jurisdiction that is very, very, very diverse. It is majority of color. It is very vibrant. It has, extraordinary potential with economic development, biotech, life science, et cetera. We have got to address all of those areas. And it is not an easy task, but because it is not an easy task, it requires, in my opinion, that when we invest, $1.8 million, it requires a clear articulation and execution that reflects on the understanding of all of those complexities. And so that's why we are, I think most of us are very vocal about what we expect, because we don't have time, The truth of the matter is that we have got too many people out there who are in need of this kind of support. And so to now hear, these issues articulated, it really is frustrating to me, because we've been talking and asking and giving direction for years on this council regarding where we need to go. So I think this is a very important pivotal moment in Montgomery County. I think other jurisdictions, and I look at Mr. Fletcher because I know DC is so way ahead in terms of how they address head-on these kinds of issues with our youth, with the underemployed, et cetera. Montgomery County for too long, I think, has been suffering from an identity crisis in terms of who we are, right? And we can't afford that anymore. So we need to see results. We have, I think, in so many instances, in so many ways, articulated what our expectations are. And so we expect outcomes, and we expect outcomes that are deliberate and are, culturally, linguistically appropriate. And Mr. Jeru Bande, he is something else. I mean, he has been able to do things in the East County, in the Mid-County, single-handedly in extraordinary fashion. So there are plenty of people out there that know what needs to be done. I will likely not support next year fiscal appropriation unless there is a major overhaul of WorkSource Montgomery, because again, we just don't have time to waste. And that's what our constituents expect, is that we redesign, realign, restructure in order to meet the needs of our constituents. So just to clarify that on the record, I appreciate everybody's reports, but I think that we've already communicated that, and now it's time for action. So I also understand that the executive decided to level fund it. I get it, you know, with new administration, but there's a lot of work to do, and I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here. Mr. Fletcher, just welcome back. Glad you're on board. And you mentioned a couple things in your opening remarks I wanted to ask about. I was happy to hear that, you know, the theme of accountability and which I think is consistent with the executive's outcomes-based approach that he's trying to implement, which I think all of us are eager to hear more about and see throughout county government. I think the metrics on that are going to be particularly important. You know, Councilmember Rice mentioned, you know, who are we hiring, and even in just how we're presented information. What are the metrics that we're tracking? What's the baseline that we've set for ourselves? What are our goals? I think that just needs to be continually, when we're having discussions, I think we need to be constantly talking about that, particularly in this area where the charge is to hire people. So could you talk a little bit about, as you're developing, has any of that formed yet, of what you're thinking that accountability and metrics are going to look like?
Yes, sir, and thank you, Councilmember, for the question. So since I've gotten here and since Andrew Klein has been here, you know, he has been focused on outcome-based, whether it's contract, whether it's budgeting, et cetera, et cetera. That is our focus. And while I was not here during the fiscal year 19 compilation of those measures, we are more focused on fiscal year 20's measures, knowing that the new administration is here, expectations are different, accountability levels are different. We've had one meeting with LA so far at our county stat, and we discussed and had a great conversation about what the future looks like. We have to sit and decide as we are creating the contract for fiscal year 20 what those metrics will be. And as we get them, we're not just going to keep them to ourselves. We are going to share them with you so that we can all start off the year on the right foot with the right understanding to answer questions that you may have before we get to July, as opposed to sitting in front of you in December, or heaven forbid, we get back to the same point next year and we haven't talked to you in a public forum. What we want to do is increase the communication that we have with your office and your colleagues on a regular basis. And it may not mean one-on-ones with you all, but it may mean a consistent document that we create to show you what our efforts look like and whether or not we are achieving. Because part of what the focus of our administration is turning the curve on where we are to where we want to be.
Well, I appreciate that, and as my colleagues have said, we want to work with you on developing that, and it should be a two-way street conversation, and you're hearing frustration on where we are, you know, and just from people who've been here, and we can't afford to wait, particularly in this area. So I appreciate that.
Yes, sir, and I understand the frustration of all of the council members, but it is our role to reduce and remove it.
And you also referenced WIOA, which is in the corrections funding, which is an issue I brought up at the March 5th hearing, and you said you had a ruling, or an opinion rather, from the county attorney. Could you tell me what that opinion is?
From my understanding, what the county attorney's opinion is that there has been a discrepancy between our county government employees versus Worksource Montgomery and the ability to use WIOA funding for specific use, which is behind the wall of the different centers. From our understanding, the way the HACs were formed and used, they were able to take advantage of this funding. And based on recent documentation that Worksource has received from the Department of Labor, there is concern that it cannot be used in that way. The bottom line of the situation is that we need to come together and have one conversation to get everyone on the same page, so that regardless of where the funding is, although we love WIOA funding, we need to make sure that the results of the needs are being met. Right. And that is our goal.
So it sounds like it's unclear on, you haven't made a determination yet, it sounds like.
The ruling from the county attorney's office, I just received it 2 days ago.
Okay.
So if we had a little bit more time, we could have maybe met before then, because what we've been doing since I've gotten here is to meet about the differences that we have as opposed to admiring the problem. Okay. What I'm trying to do is get to the end, the results, and I can promise you that shortly after we have this hearing, we will have a meeting and we will be able to provide an answer back to council, just like I believe that county attorney's opinion went to council. well, then the follow-up should also come to council. And then the more we do that, the more you will be informed.
All right, well, yeah, we're obviously all eager to hear about that because we want to make sure we're delivering services in the best way possible to all of our folks, but particularly folks in corrections that are reentering. And so we want to make sure we're as flexible as possible. And like I said, it had been used in the past, as you mentioned, so I know it's a new entity, but it seems like the dollars should still be able to be used. The other question, Interfaith Works, I'm glad you're leveraging your expertise, Shane, and I'm glad you're here. Has that partnership started? What's the dollar amount? How long? What are you going to be doing? I mean, maybe this is for Ms. Giles as well, but whoever wants to answer that.
Well, I think we're still, we have a joint RFP pending. I won't comment on that, but we've been exploring ways that we can work together very closely because I think we have expertise that can inform some of get to some of the issues that you're raising here in this hearing, and can be very helpful in that. And we also, in my experience in Washington State, much of what we were doing gets at some of the metrics and outcomes questions that you have on the council in terms of where we may be going. Washington State aligned their funding entirely with outcomes. And we're not quite there as a county yet, I don't think, but in Washington, you only got paid if you produced the outcomes. So the outcome, it wasn't a grant. It wasn't something where you showed what you did with the money. It was you got paid for job placements and retention and meeting certain standards around starting wages.
And so, well, just to speak to, so is this going to be you have a joint RFP, so you're going to give money, WorkSource is going to give money to Interfaith to implement this? Is that what's happening? Okay.
So, I mean, what we're looking at is the expertise from Interfaith Works in our higher programs because they already have a proof of concept. So we have a joint RFP that we will be able to use those funds for if we're awarded it, but we are committed to a partnership regardless of whether we win that RFP or not to look at expanding our higher programs as we move forward.
Okay. I guess it's just a little odd. It would seem that what you're describing would be a core function of WorkSource Montgomery, and I don't understand why we're sitting here 3 years after the founding and saying we're going to do this innovative thing, and that doesn't seem to make sense to me.
So let me give you a little bit more background then. As we started to work, and again, and as we're developing it, our first primary concern was making sure that we were federally compliant, and working with that in our first year. The only way a workforce system works is if we collaborate with all of the entities that are working together in providing those services. It can't be an isolated program. WorkSource Montgomery needs to be a convening organization and leverage the talent and the trust in every community so that we can be able to provide the most effective services. Interfaith Works, we have partnerships out there now with our youth services for identity and LAYC. We have a partnership with CASA. We have a partnership with Arts on the Block. We have a partnership with JCA. We have multiple partnerships with Doors. The only way we're able to do this is to bring these services together in a coordinated fashion so that we can address all of those issues. One entity cannot do it alone and shouldn't do it alone, and the Washington State model is a great example of that.
How many, my last question, I'll defer, I know my other colleagues have questions. I see in the budget and the breakdown, last year, there's, while it's salary and wages, there's $789,046. How many FTEs does WorkSource Montgomery have?
We have a total of 11 FTEs.
11. And has that been consistent over time? What's the?
Within one or two, yeah.
Okay. And what's the turnover been?
Turnover, I think we've lost 3 employees since we've started.
Okay, well, my understanding was higher than that, but are there any current lawsuits or litigation against WorkSource Montgomery for discrimination or complaints?
There's not.
And there's been no settlements?
There was not a settlement, but we had a workforce, a compensation for a situation, yeah.
And that were county funds used to pay that out?
Yes.
Okay. If you could get specific information to me on the number of FTEs when you started and then how many have turned over, I'd appreciate that. I'll just say as I close, I have serious concerns, continue to have serious concerns about the level of functionality of this organization. And I would agree with my council president. While I'm inclined to defer to the county executive's flat funding recommendation this year, I will not be inclined to do so next year absent some significant changes. And so just want to put that on the record, and I appreciate you being here.
Friedson? Thank you, and thank everybody for being here and for all the hard work, and I appreciate the staff and partners for being here, and also the board members, not only for work with Worksource Montgomery, but the other work that you do every day in the community and in the economy. I appreciate the fact that we were talking a lot about, accountability and transparency, and I lack some of the programmatic experience and involvement that several of my colleagues have, and so I yield to them, frankly, on a lot of that, because I just haven't been as involved as several of my colleagues have, and I take their concerns with a lot of weight and seriousness, and I just lack the personal involvement on a regular basis to focus on it. But I did just want to ask some questions, from a kind of taking a step back, a broader viewpoint here. And, my view is on the metrics aspect of it, which I am a huge believer in. I think one of the challenges is it's hard to have metrics when there isn't a strategic vision to set up the metrics. And I think that is what, in my view, is lacking. And I think there's a broad challenge there. And, from my perspective, I fully understand the WIOA portion of this, whether it's working or not working, whether it could be improved. I think there's lots of conversation, robust conversation to have there. And again, I have colleagues, Mr. Giwando and others, who have much more experience in working directly with WIOA than I have. I just know what it is, but I have never done the work on a regular basis. But I am still struggling personally, to figure out how we decide what we're doing, how we decide what programs get funded, what needs there are in the workforce pipeline, how are we connecting, who are we determining these needs from, who is making this broad decision, and then how are we deciding on both what we need to do, how we accomplish and solve and address those needs, and then how we assess the outcomes of whether or not the solutions that we've attempted to put in place are working or not working. I think, to me, there's a significant disconnect there, and I'm still, figuring out what role, we've, set up these organizations, WorkSource and the EDC, and did that for a specific rationale, and I think we are still haven't established whose job. Is it the board's job to figure these things out? Is it our job as the county to set these strategic directions to you? And I personally am just not quite comfortable, and I haven't had anybody explain to me very specifically in a way that I could understand of where those lines are drawn, who is responsible for what, how are we making these determinations? And without that, my view is we are, sending ships out to sea. We're doing different programs, have no real idea of how they are working together. And one side may say, hey, we're doing really good work in this particular program, and other people are saying, no, you're not. And one, a group may say that this is the right approach to a particular issue, and another group may not. And I just don't think that there is a lot of strategic buy-in and understanding from everybody of exactly how this is supposed to work, who is responsible for what, and what role everybody is playing in it. And so I think my concerns are, I think, different than my colleagues, honestly, just because I don't have that level of background and have not been working in this as long and as specifically as they have. But I share concerns, but it's a much more global concern, at least to me, of what are we doing? Why are we doing it? How are we doing it? And how do we determine whether or not we're doing well at it? And that's what I'd like to figure out.
If I could just respond real quickly to that, as we talk about it, we do have, WorkSource Montgomery does have a strategic plan that was determined through our board work. We continue to have communications with the council, and we're really welcome to do that as we align those priorities with the county priorities, and that's really what our biggest efforts are to be. So it is a shared commitment. It's where does the county want to go? How is the board taking a look at that and making those decisions within our partnerships? It was a very different directive from the PHED committee last year. As the chair of the PHED committee last year, really definitely wanted our focus to be on businesses. So we have had a bit of a shift in our priority. We've never taken our eye off the ball of working with our unemployed and our underemployed as well. But at one point, the biggest emphasis was to connect and do career pathways with our industries from last year. And so in that sense, when you talk about there being a wavering of strategic plans, I think you're absolutely on the money when you talk about this total need for communication between the council, the county leadership, and the board to ensure that there is that alignment moving forward.
All right, I was going to say something similar to that, which is that, I remember going back when my first couple years on the council back in 2011, 2012, looking at the DED Workforce Development Program and seeing an operation that was not strong. And, it had the federal funding flowing into it, and there was really very little success in the metrics, and there was criticism from the state. There was letters sent from the state, from Dollar to the county, saying your program is not achieving the goals that we wanted to achieve, and it was just it wasn't working. And I think that was a part of the motivation to create WorkSource Montgomery, but the other part was that as little success as we were having with that program, we really had no program at all for the career pathway model. And that was the emerging, school of thought, was that counties, local governments need to be figuring out how to feed the pipeline of their local industries and diversify the pipeline and, promote workforce development as an economic development strategy. And so WorkSource Montgomery was created, I think, to do both better. That was really the intent. There has been a lot of emphasis on the pathways and, the kind of how to feed the most dynamic industries of the county and where the higher end jobs are in the future and how to get our young people going into those. But I'm hearing a lot of criticism of our success with the more vulnerable residents of our community. And, it's unclear to me whether we're doing a better job than we were before. Certainly I'm hearing from many that we're not. And I think there's a concern that WorkSource Montgomery is taking its eyes off of that ball to, as you said, I'm not sure you can totally pin it on the former chair of the PHED committee. I think it was the county altogether in many ways. It was the executive branch. Tom Street, you're here. Are you still on the board, or you're still on the board, but you represented the county on the board when you were here. So, I think we need to figure out how we can succeed with both priorities, because they're both important, and I think we're seeing dissatisfaction, in so many ways. So one thing I wanted to suggest is, this program that's been mentioned from Seattle is very intriguing. Perhaps we could have OLO look into some of these more outcome-based programs around the country and see what lessons we could get from those programs. And it doesn't have to be a year-long study. Maybe they can do a quicker review, like a memo review, because I know that there's urgency and there's a lot happening on this topic right now, and we would need to get some guidance quickly. And certainly you've heard fairly significant positions from council members about the funding and the need for change. So I know the executive branch, we have to look to the executive branch to do the work here. You know, the council is more at the vision level as a practical reality, but we do approve the funding, and so, you know, we're looking for some action there. Sure, Mr. Joanda.
One other question. On the higher centers in the libraries, I think that's a great entry point. I'm the lead for libraries on the Education Committee, and I've been talking to them, Education and Culture Committee, excuse me, which is why we have libraries in there now, because of the culture. Yeah, exactly. Could you just talk to me about how that model is? What is it in all 21, or is it?
Currently, we are not. Currently, we are in the White Oak Library, Marilyn Praisner Library, and Rockville Library.
Okay. And there's a person there?
Yes.
During business hours? Or?
Yes, so we have a schedule that's put out, and it's on the library website as well. If you look at their list of events, and you can register on the website. When the person is there, an announcement is made in the library. Workforce Montgomery Hire Center is here. Anybody's interested in employment can go to this specific room. So we have staff there sporadically, but there is a full calendar.
That's a Worksource Montgomery staff person?
Yes.
Okay. And how long has that been going on now?
We started it in December as a trial. When we initially started it, it was just me. So now that we've had able to bring in more
Literally
staff.
you in the center.
Correct. And then we were able to bring in additional staff to help grow that program. And then with our partnership with Interfaith Works, we'll be able to grow it even more.
That'll be a part. Okay, good. I'm very interested to hear how that's going and as you're starting to get people into service and what type of services you're delivering to people, and because I think libraries serve as such a awesome entry point for so many people seeking services and needs in employment. So I'm glad that that's happening, and I'd like to know how it's going, but also potentially see it expand, because those are frontline services, and like you said, people might not come to a job center, but they'll come to a library. So, all right, thank you.
Great. So again, we'll go through the memo in a moment, but I mentioned this earlier this morning, an event I was at. Last evening, I attended a remarkable announcement of a new program at USG, the Translational Life Sciences Program, which is a collaboration between UMBC, Montgomery College, and USG to get students on the track to be educated for jobs in the life sciences sector here, and in the chemistry and biology and biotech. And it was an amazing event. Dr. Freeman-Hrabowski was here, Dr. Pollard, Dr. Edelstein, Nancy King, has been a big supporter at the state level. That initiative is a kind of model example of how you bring higher education institutions into your workforce development strategy. And I really want to see us building out more of that. I thought that Worksource Montgomery was going to kind of do that with us, and I don't want to lose that part of the conversation as we sharpen the focus here on how are we going to meet the needs of those who are most vulnerable, most difficult to support to get into the workforce. So we do still need to have a two-pronged strategy here, so we'll just got to keep our eyes on that as well.
I want to just emphasize that we do have those kinds of partnerships where we're looking at not only the in-demand pipeline, but providing opportunities for those individuals underrepresented in those pipelines. We have coder partnerships with Montgomery College. We have American Promise, the Tech Hire partnerships, where we work with them to make those connections and work with the most vulnerable. In the nursing and healthcare, we have a nursing grant where we provide scholarships for those individuals underrepresented in those career pathways. We have a hospitality partnership that we're working on that works with both the travel industry as well as with food services. Again, providing services for those that are underrepresented or would not have those opportunities otherwise. All of these are within partnerships within our higher ed or a learning institution. So I'm rattling off a few, but we've definitely had huge success in those partnerships and look forward to continuing that. We see the career pathway as the opportunity for, it's not meeting the need of I need a job and have a job. There's a big gap, a skills gap across the nation about being qualified for those jobs. And the career pathway and apprenticeship programs are the answer to that solution.
All right, so we'll keep working our way through all of these topics. Gene, why don't you take us into the packet?
Sure, if my mic works. So, yeah, given the conversation and how council staff approached this, there's $1.88 million for WorkSource Montgomery in the executive's budget. Wanted to pull out, based on Circles 8, Circles 9, and Circles 10, the programs that WorkSource Montgomery listed and the ones that are going to use county funding, and look at those this year to make sure the committees are understanding how that money is allocated and if there's any augmentation or just differences of there to be able to discuss that. As noted in the council packet, the WorkSource Montgomery board will determine a budget in fiscal 20, but staff believes this is the time for the council to indicate its understanding for the money it's going to appropriate. With that, we'll go ahead and jump into each program. The first one is the Corrections Job Center, as it was discussed pretty in detail during March 5th. WorkSource Montgomery indicates they plan to allocate $165,000 for this program in fiscal 20. $50,000 will be from WorkSource Montgomery's budget to make up for a state grant that is no longer available. $80,000 will be from the Department of Corrections budget, that's part of the base budget. And then WorkSource Montgomery said they will be able to use $35,000 from WIO funding depending on eligibility of the folks coming out of the correction facility. There's 3 bullets there on page 3 that indicate the metrics that WorkSource Montgomery is going to measure related to this, and this will fund 2.5 FTEs in fiscal 20, which is the same as, or close to the same as what we were doing in fiscal 19. Staff also understands, talking with council analysts for the corrections facility and with Director Green, that there may be desire to augment that with additional FTEs outside of the correction facility, and understands that may be discussed during the Public Safety Committee meeting today for that particular budget. But that is what we have for this year. So I will turn it over to the chairs and see if there's additional conversation.
I think Councilmember Rice has a comment here.
Absolutely. This is a big deal for me, and so let me just be very clear, and Mr. Fletcher, you're new, so let me break it down for you as best I can. In 2014, U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder and U.S. Labor Secretary Tom Perez came and toured the facility at Clarksburg. And I'm going to read you some quotes. Eric Holder said, "We hope to replicate these programs around the country. You are enhancing public safety." Tom Perez said, "Innovation abounds right here in Montgomery County," said Perez, who noted these programs are a win for the inmates, the staff, and the community. According to Perez, one of the most effective strategies is to reduce crime is to make sure people have a job when they get out of jail. And he said, having an American Job Center office in the jail is a remarkable investment to make sure the inmates have the skills to re-enter the workplace. Later this fall, Perez said he will be announcing a grant competition to replicate the Montgomery County model and its success at 10 sites across the country. So my question to you, Mr. Fletcher, is why do you feel that we should change the program at Clarksburg Jail from something that was noted by our then Attorney General and U.S. Secretary of Labor to something different when the results are so astounding that we're going to replicate the model throughout the country?
Thank you, Councilmember. And I did see the video, and I thought that it was extremely well recognized and did get a lot of public accolades for what it had done. But I was not here when the model changed. So my understanding that when we decided to outsource the program, that changed the ability for us to keep the exact same program. Now, I believe that that was the case, and Ellie can support that, but there were some limitations on what we could do versus when we as a county were running the program versus a private entity running the program.
The choice of outsourcing and that from, can Director Green come to the, I'd like to have Director Green at the.
Oh, look who's here, Director Green.
For a short period of time.
Well, before you take the mic, you know, I have to acknowledge you've accepted an exciting new position with the state, and we're going to miss you here. You've been just an important and powerful leader for Montgomery County, and I've learned so much from you. I think we all have, and we're going to miss you. And today is not your farewell, so let's get back to business. Thank you.
He's still working.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. which is why he's here. Director Green, can you respond to what Mr. Fletcher just said about a change in the program at the Clarksburg Jail?
The focus of the program has not changed in what we want to accomplish, and helping individuals that are leaving incarceration support themselves and support in our community. We have worked with the executive, and based on some reductions that occurred in 17, we have an agreement with Worksource Montgomery and working with ACAO Fletcher that regardless of what we're called, a hire center or an America's Job Center, we are doubling down on that commitment to make sure that program and the successes that it realized will not change. We will get back to where we would like to be with our metrics. I've met with Ellie on a number of occasions, and with Mr. Fletcher being present, that the warm handoff, that's the Welcome Home program. That's the piece that takes an individual from inside the walls and helps us make that connection externally. It's critical. It's part of the Offender Workforce Development Program as it was written by the National Institute of Corrections and as a best practice, and we have full commitment from Worksource Montgomery that is going to be stood up, and with the executive's support, we're going to make sure that occurs, and that's a key piece.
Mr. And Director Green, you're very gracious in terms of your description. I've talked with a number of your staff who are very concerned about the direction in which we take this program and are concerned about their hands being constrained in terms of a different structure. Has anything changed in terms of the efficacy of your program since the Secretary and Attorney General toured your program in 2014?
I think we've had some growing pains under the new structure, but I got to put those growing pains behind us. I've got to move forward with what we need to accomplish in FY20. I've heard you loud and clear what the intent and the desire of this council is. Yeah, our numbers dropped off. Our ability to make that warm handoff decreased. There was some conversation and structure in how we were able to use those WEO funds. We've hopefully moved beyond that, and I think with the assistance of the ACO and, quite frankly, the support of the county executive in this budget, that we will do so. That piece is critical. Individuals with criminal justice involvement leaving our facilities, they encounter significant barrier. It takes more time, it takes effort, and the connection to jobs is critically important and has a direct impact on recidivism and public safety. We have aired that, we have discussed it, we have worked through it, and hopefully we have a strong commitment that whether we're a hire center or an AJC, the service and the focus will be where it needs to be to serve that population, which is a very critical population. It's a piece I need to concentrate on because for every dollar we spend there, it's 11 to 15 in our community when keeping people employed, connected to their families, and being able to support themselves.
So my concern lies with us trying to once again reset the job center at Clarksburg Jail. You talked about your growing pains when you had a new contract, and we would be resetting to something that's unproven. I mean, when we talk about the hire center and I asked about results, we talked about something that quite frankly was the work of Jay Rubanda in terms of the employment that was there. So from that perspective, I'm trying to understand why we would bank on something that's unproven. I'll get to you in a second. Bank on something that's unproven instead of focusing on the what we know works. And you had mentioned something about in 2017 about less funding. Can you talk about what that was and what that had as an impact in terms of the efficacy of the program?
Well, in 17, that's when we lost that warm handoff piece into the community. It was picked up by Worksource Montgomery in another manner.
Can I just stop you there?
Yes, sir.
So in 2017, you lost funding and you put part of it to Worksource Montgomery to do the warm handoff. And at that time is when you said that also is when you saw a drop in terms of the efficacy of the program. Is that not correct?
We went from offender workforce development specialist to another certification in the community to help that population, and it was not as effective at that point.
So it seems to me as though, again, just a person who's observing from the outside, that the infusion of WorkSource Montgomery actually was the challenge in terms of the efficacy of the program.
It was a change in structure.
You don't have to answer that question. I've made my own decision when it comes to that. All right. Look, we can argue about whether or not East Case County was successful in jobs. I know, and I trust the word of folks who are working in the community there, so I don't need to argue and debate that. Let me just be very clear. The American Job Center, from my opinion, needs to stay an American Job Center. If WorkSource Montgomery is not committed to keeping it under the current structure, I'd like to hear it now, because if not, I'll make a motion that we pull the funding for that and put it directly to corrections. So I need an answer today. Mr. ACAO?
Can you?
Yes. So if there's not a commitment to keep the American Job Center at the Department of Corrections in this budget, then I'll make a motion that we pull the $165,000 from the WorkSource Montgomery budget and allocate it directly to corrections, which $80,000 has already been committed of corrections, so it would be $85,000. So I need an
Question is to Mr. Fletcher,
Yes.
essentially?
Yes.
Okay.
Or Ms. Giles, either one.
Oh, I'll answer it. That decision has to be made by WorkSource Montgomery's board, and I cannot commit to that today.
All right, so I'd like to put on.
Can you, before,
Yep.
so, once again, presently, WorkSource Montgomery has funding to provide this program inside of the county jail through, administered by the Department of Corrections. What is the source of this funding? Is this county funding? Is this state funding?
The funding, 80,000 comes from the Department of Corrections that's then contracted to WorkSource Montgomery.
Okay, so corrections, the funding is in the corrections, but,
That's 80,000.
Okay.
50,000 is coming from the WorkSource Montgomery NDA that obviously the committees are looking at right now. And then 35,000, as WorkSource Montgomery indicated in my questions and answers, is from WIOA funding for eligible. So I would say only 130,000 is available of county funding for this. And the 2 FTEs that are inside the correction facility are contracted through WorkSource Montgomery with Grant Associates. So if the Councilmember Rice's motion were to succeed, then it would move $50,000, I believe, from WorkSource's budget to corrections budget and have corrections specifically manage that portion of the program.
and did corrections previously, I'm sorry to ask a little
No,
more clarity,
please,
but did
absolutely.
corrections previously manage that funding in the older relationship?
We managed the 80,000, not the 50,000. That was the grant funding that was in the program.
So that was added to the program?
It was managed by WorkSource Montgomery or
So we augmented the program that we had before, but we augmented it through funding provided to WorkSource Montgomery. And there's been criticism of the effectiveness of this program since that handoff occurred.
Let me clarify a little bit.
So would you like to ask for a second yet, or do you want to hear some
Ms. Giles can
dialogue?
respond.
Okay.
So when we were very first formed and the contract was first developed, I got a call, frantic call from Gail at the jail saying, we're not included in the contract. So there was no communication about the program in the law in that transition. So that was an initial glitch.
Well, I see Ms. Starkey here, so why don't we bring Ms. Starkey up as well, so we can have a full discussion of all the details
While
of this, because I think that there's a lot of things that are being said that
Okay,
may
while
be
she's coming
disputed.
up, let me just finish up my
Please.
comments, and then we would love to hear from Gail, too. So we met, we talked about how can we better fund this. This is with so we talked about it with our vendor through WIOA. The clarification I had gotten under the direction of the state was that the WIOA funds the individuals who received WIOA funds needed to meet an eligibility requirement that was prohibitive if they're incarcerated. I personally went on my own mission to find outside funding to preserve the integrity of this program. For 2 years, I was able to find outside grant funding to support this program. WorkSource Montgomery is committed to reentry. I want to make it very clear. It's not a desire. When we went back to see if we could get that grant again, we could not achieve those funds, and so our goal, what we decided to do is to reallocate funds that was already dedicated to another program to the reentry program. So it's been something that's been a motivation for WorkSource all along to ensure that that program stays in the integrity that it wanted to be. Despite the original neglect as we moved forward and we were first organized. It wasn't a program that was in standing with WorkSource Montgomery when the new entity started.
It wasn't, the direction from the executive branch at the
It was not
time was
included.
not provided, that this was
Not
one of your
included,
responsibilities?
and we worked together to make sure that this program stood up again.
Okay. Why don't we hear from
Good morning, council. Thank you.
Starkey.
I'm Gail Starkey, Deputy Warden and Inmates of the Correctional Facility, and I oversee the AJC Satellite Center within the jail. My account of the incident, when DED was in the process of being disbanded, we had meetings at DED to talk about bringing on the new entity. With that, Lori Strump was the consultant. They noticed that the jail piece was out at that point. That was still in the beginning of the processes. When Ellie was brought in after Lori Strump was removed, they informed Ellie that then within DED at the meeting. So just for the record, I did not call her frantically saying that that we were forgotten. That was put out there up front. It was just an error. It was in some paperwork and then it wasn't in others.
Look, let me just say this. There's a lot of back and forth, and this is one of the reasons why we have the concern we have about WorkSource Montgomery. It's because of things just like this. Let me just say, I don't like this. I'm not happy with this. I am very concerned about when I have people telling me very different things that are sitting here at the dais when it talks about taxpayer money, but more importantly, when it comes to people, the people who need the services to make sure that they're not committing recidivism. Mr. Fletcher, it is not a question. That are committing recidivism and who need to get their lives back on track. I have toured the jail. I have talked to inmates. I have sat with them and seen and gone to graduations there with the partnership of Montgomery College, where the president, Dr. Pollard, received the White House Champion of Change Award because of their collaboration with the AJC. I am pressing my motion. I think that it's time for us to take this out of WorkSource Montgomery and take this back for the county. So that is my motion.
I will second your motion, but I wanted to, and Mr. Juando seconds it as well, but how much money is needed? Because there's 35,000 that's we owe money, which I don't think you probably can transfer, right? So can WorkSource Montgomery continue to provide $35,000 to this? I mean, it would be a reverse transfer, or should we just transfer and add to the reconciliation list so that the program can be whole? Gene, can you provide some analysis here?
Sure. I mean, based on the motion that I understand from Councilmember Rice, at the moment we'd reduce WorkSource's NDA budget by $50,000, and then the add would also go to the corrections. So I guess we would let public safety know that they would like to add that. So that goes on the reconciliation with the funding coming from the WorkSource budget. And then I will turn to Director Green if there's additional funding that's needed beyond just the 130,000 now that would, if all of that succeeded, would be in the corrections budget.
Director Green, can you share some comments here? We'd like to know if the Department of Corrections can take the program back if we allocate funding for you to do so.
So I'm going to give you the longer answer. The longer answer is that there was never an intent to separate out those that are incarcerated and returning back to our community to have a separate jail-based program. That was never the intent. I don't want a jail-based program. That was not the intent of Mr. Leggett when I believe we were included in that transition, and that will be later. And I don't think that's the intent of the executive now for us to be a separate entity. I don't want a jail-based program. I want a jail-based program that transitions to our community. So to that end, could we? Of course we could. Is it going to be the effective program that we're talking about when people need to transition for jobs and into a welcoming community, into the resources that already exist? and that handoff. So I'm not debating whether we should or not. I'm debating that's not the intent of America's Job Centers and one-stops, which is what they were called to begin with.
Director Green, let me just
Give them
interrupt you by saying that you've heard from 2 council members.
Yes, I have, sir.
That talk about that we're not even sure if Worksource Montgomery will exist
I understand.
next year, at least when it comes to county funding. I mean, Worksource Montgomery can continue to do what it wants to, but from a county funding side. So from that perspective, there is no guarantee of linkage with Worksource Montgomery from that perspective anyway. So I would encourage you to think forwardly about what is best in Clarksburg Jail's interest in terms of how we can continue the success. Because the interesting thing is that this job center was there before Worksource Montgomery even existed. And so under that structure, how do we get back to what that was, is what my motion is to get us back to what the American Job Center was before Worksource Montgomery's involvement, what structure we need to set up to make that happen. I think, I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but this council, I think, would be willing to support. And so that's what we'd like to see, because it seems to me as though, just my own personal opinion, no one needs to weigh in, that the rails, that everything went off the rails after we decided to partner with Worksource Montgomery. However, that may not have been intentioned. It may have been just because Worksource Montgomery was just starting. I don't need to get into that. All I know is that that's where things seem to have gone awry. Councilmember Joanna wanted to.
Just to be clear, Director Green, so prior, when the program was functioning the way it should, and you had the warm handoff was to DD, to whom? Who was the warm handoff to? How did that happen?
Warm handoffs were to the one-stops in the community,
Perfect.
to the other individuals that we were working for. It was a single system. It
Right.
was, and that is my,
That's your concern.
that is
here.
my focus.
Yeah.
My focus is like every other program we have, Councilmember Rice, and I do not argue the point with you, sir, is that our substance abuse treatment program is a program that we have operating in the jail that we find in the community. It's not a jail-based program. It's a program that operates in our community that happens to be inside the jail. That has been the secret to our success in Montgomery County and Department of Corrections for many, many years and many programs that we have. I cannot debate your perception and your reality of what you see today and to how to protect that program. That is not my intent. But my intent is to say that in a perfect world, all of our programs need to have community connection, need to be connected to the greater good of what's already happening. And I will leave that decision and how we keep this focus we want to serve the population. We want to serve people that need jobs.
So what, if I could just ask then, while I'm fully in support of the intent of Councilmember Rice's motion, I am sensitive to the fact that you need someone to hand off to, and they need to do a functioning job, and that's the role of, when you first came up, you said there's been a commitment to change that portion of it, and it's going to be better now. And what could you either one of you talk about what that means and what specifically is going to be changed to get it back to where it needs to be? And because we don't want to do something, at least I don't, that is not going to help you, but I am frustrated, as Councilmember Rice is, and about that it's not happening. So, we want to do the right thing, but could you speak to that?
We did a side-by-side of the higher model versus the AJC model and the current model we have now. It did not match up. There was a commitment from Worksource Montgomery to make it match up. So our higher center model will be, when we reach that point to reach a memorandum of understanding, our higher center model will be the AJC model. It will be offender workforce development specialists that are trained and certified. That's the warm handoff piece in the community that know how to navigate these barriers. We can still do that handoff. Our handoff will be to wherever their higher centers are, because individuals leaving our jail, citizens of our community, we can get them there and we can make that handoff to stay connected to whatever's happening in the county. We need to stay connected. We need to be connected to all of these organizations, and however that money's being spent, whether it's county dollars or we owe them money, I need to know what's happening to hand off people too. So we would work to keep that connection. That would then be a jail-based program connecting to whatever's happening in the community.
Okay. Well, I defer to Councilmember Rice on the allocation. I want to make sure we don't lose that piece,
Yeah, and so I think that, again, look, at the end of the day, Worksource Montgomery as our entity for serving the community for underemployed and unemployed still exists. I mean, so any handoff to our higher centers or anything else within Worksource Montgomery is still their responsibility. That's the reason why we have a $1.8 million budget that goes to them, is for that purpose. So that should not go away. What I'd like to see is,
They still have funding. Under the motion, they'll continue to have $35,000
for
of
WIOA funding. Exactly.
and they could continue to support the program.
Absolutely. I just think in light of not getting a commitment from the county executive side in terms of keeping this under the current structure, and that's the whole reason for the motion, that's the reason why I was forced in my hand to go in this direction, because from my perspective, I don't want us to continue to stray away from. We've already strayed away in 2017. That continues to stray us away from. And in light of some of the growing pains and challenges that Worksource Montgomery has had in terms of its efficacy of employment when it comes to East County and others, that's where I say, let's keep some of the consistency in place to allow for us to do. And then we'll be making a judgment when it comes to Worksource as a whole in terms of what we want to do. And then we can relook at this in another year. So that's why I'd still press my motion.
Okay, so presently, the budget for this program is $80,000 that's from the DOCR's budget.
Right.
$50,000 from the Worksource Montgomery and $35,000 from WIOA, and together that $115,000 supports 2.5 FTEs. That doesn't seem right. So
165,000.
165,000.
The 35,000.
right, 165,000. I did my math wrong.
Yeah.
That supports. That still doesn't seem. Is that right? 2.5 FTEs out of 165,000.
That is what WorkSource communicated, and based on what I've heard from Director Green, that's just to keep it level for based on fiscal 19, it sounds like there may be additional funding required to have a warm handoff.
So if we want to continue to have
Additional
2.5 FTEs, we need to not only move the 50 back from the Worksource Montgomery NDA to DOCR, and we can't move 35 from WIOA, so we need to add 35. Right. So did you already amend, or would you accept a friendly amend?
Absolutely.
So it's a transfer of 50 and an addition of 35 to the rec list, right, Gene? That would be what I explained?
Correct.
And, but I think we would want to hear from Worksource Montgomery. Would you, do you agree to continue to support the program with the 35 in WIOA? Can you report to us on that? Because we hear Director Green's comment that this has got to be, there has to be integration with the community program.
We absolutely make a commitment to, and we continue. We work right now with the pre-release center and with the reentry program. We will make a commitment to ensure that there is that handoff within the community. The funding that we are using in Worksource is $50,000 of our operation budget and the $80,000 from DACA. So it's $130,000 that we've been using in our budget.
So could I just ask, the $35,000 from WIOA is not being used for this program then?
That is money that we use within the job center, and it's for eligibility within, as individuals who come, we first do a triage, they identify themselves as reentry, we enroll them in WIOA. So it's an enrollment piece. It's not a piece where, so it could exceed 35,000. If we have additional people who show up that need these services, we don't put a limit on that. So it would be continue that way. The 35,000 right now was just a ballpark of looking at a dedicated person within the job center that we're allocating that time for, so that there's always one point of contact for individuals that are coming into the job center that is trained to work with the reentry population.
And so but that still leaves open this question we're talking about with the county attorney about using WIOA funding more writ large to address some of these behind the wall and pieces.
That is correct, and we're going to move forward with that piece regardless, because we want to make sure that the county is getting the best benefit possible from WIOA.
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
If I may just add, Ellie just mentioned that they're working with Pre-Release Center. Well, Chief Talley is here in the audience, plus she's acting director when Director Green leaves. I'm not sure what work they're doing with Pre-Release Center. At that facility, which is our Community Corrections Division, they have community release coordinators that actually find jobs and deal with an established employer base to hire those individuals, those inmate residents that live in that facility. And also, and if I may add, it would be wonderful to have some type of working MOU with whoever the vendor is with WSM as well as WSM to address the specific needs as that handoff and working in the community. No, it is not. That also has gotten lost somewhere in the shuffle.
And you're saying that you're not sure what is happening with the pre-release center?
Well, not
If
with,
there's anything-
yeah, not as far as them getting hired.
Can I respond to that? Sure. So actually, we've had all of the work-based coordinators come in and tour the facility. We present every event that we're doing in our job centers. We send them to each of the work-based coordinators. They send their participants. I personally sign off on the documentation to verify that they came, the time they came, and the time they left. So we have been working with the pre-release centers. And this, I've done it more within the past 2 to 3 months, but as I said, all of the pre-release coordinators, the work-based coordinators have come out and toured the facility and spoken with me one-on-one.
And touring the facility is quite different than their responsibility to make sure that the residents get hired, that falls under Department of Corrections within Community Corrections.
We have work release coordinators that
Yes.
are employed by the Department of Corrections that work directly with a number of employers, and our work release employability rates very high. We will use community resources to send our residents to, as needed, to go into the community and attend job fairs or do other pieces, and that's on an as-needed basis with our residents. So they engage the community, they engage health and human, they engage many services in the community as needed outside the facility. Our primary means of employment is work release coordinators inside the system.
Okay. Wow.
Maybe, I'm sorry, I was going to help us out here a little bit possibly.
That's what we pay you to do.
But you guys are elected, so I didn't want to step on anyone's toes. I think in terms of imagining or reimagining where we're at, the two FTEs, I understand that the $130,000, regardless of where it's allocated, currently funds the two positions inside the correction facility. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. In that regard, based on my understanding of the motion, staff would recommend having that $130,000 fully with the Department of Corrections. So regardless of what entity is administering WIOA funds in the future, that money is locked in the Department of Corrections for those two positions within inside the correction facility. Does that make sense? And if that makes sense, then
That's the 50.
That's just that's moving the 50 from WorkSource to the corrections. So it locks in the two FTEs
exactly.
inside the
Take that without objection?
Yes. Now,
Okay.
let me just say and Director Green, one second here. Let me just say that I think we need to come back to this at post-budget, because, again, I want to make it very clear, again, what my intention and expectation is. As the person who's the district council member representing Clarksburg Jail, I intend on this continuing to be an American Job Center until we can meet, Mr. Fletcher, you and I, and sit down with leaders at the jail of corrections and have a conversation about what it is that we envision for Clarksburg Jail and for the folks who are coming out of the facility at Clarksburg Jail, and what the expectations of services will be provided for them. And then we can talk about a memorandum of understanding that I think needs to be there to help clarify some of these things that everyone seems to be not on the same page with. And this is why it's concerning. And this is why, again, and again, I'm not blaming anyone. Let me be very clear. Never once did I say it's anyone's fault. I'm just stating facts. Things are happening and people are falling through the cracks. That's what's happening as a result. We are not providing the same level of service that we used to before. Those are facts, right? Didn't say it's a responsibility of anyone. It's just Worksession Montgomery came in, we have a new structure now, and these things are happening. So as a result, we need to come up with a very clear and concise understanding of how this process will work so that we're not letting anyone who we know needs our help tremendously to fall through the cracks. All right, so that's where my expectation is outside of the motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I need a little more clarity, though. So we've agreed to 50. The half FTE, is there actually a person, or is that essentially that's the amount of money you're allocating, but it's being drawn from many different people? Ellie?
So we have, within the Job Center, a designated job coach that's covered for, within our WIOA funding, that is the point of contact for all reentry. And so as a 0.5 of that position that's already there is a dedicated person.
So,
Director Green, you have,
No, that is not my understanding of the conversations that took place. We will need to reconvene with Mr. Fletcher. Needs to be a dedicated person to do the handoff, and that was an additional person, not an existing. I'll need to convene with the ACAO on that.
so there should be a dedicated person at
Additional-
WorkSource Montgomery.
Additional individual.
An additional individual. So I think we want to have an additional individual at WorkSource Montgomery.
let's just put it on the reconciliation list.
Well, do we need to? I don't know that we need
To that
to.
end, there's still 1.8 million minus 50,000 in WorkSource's budget. The committees could today say, make sure there's a dedicated person.
Let's do
Right.
that. Let's put that in.
That's already in the budget, and, okay. And
Okay.
so,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's all good.
that's the kind of the
so-
reason we're having the conversation.
Yes.
Right.
1.8 million, there's a slug of money going, and the council should make it clear how that money should be used.
Okay, so today we have 2.5 people, but now we're going to have 2 people at DOCR and 1 person at WorkSource Montgomery. And it is a
Full one
full
person dedicated to
dedicated
the handoff.
FTE.
Or dedicated to the
There'll be
handoff.
dedicated to the handoff, there'll be 3 FTEs
That's right.
Correct.
for the program.
Correct.
And just to clarify, under the current model, although there's $130,000 with the Department of Corrections, it is my understanding that that money will still go back to WorkSource to continue to contract with the 2 positions inside the correction facility. So
And we can
I
have
realize
language
that
associated with that.
it
Yes.
seems like a sleight of hand, but that's just to clarify how that money will be working in fiscal '20.
Vendor.
All right.
Vendor.
With the new vendor, yes.
Well, terrific. Mr. Green, appreciate your work. You might be a short timer here, but, we got so much confidence in you, so we really need you. Okay, that resolves that issue.
It does, and I think just so that the council is clear, WorkSource should communicate back what a 1 FTE position will require in terms of cost and how that funding will be allocated in the fiscal '20 budget, just so the council has that clear.
Okay.
Based on that and time, should I continue through the rest of the program?
Well, let's move on to an issue that is also of interest to some council
Correct.
members.
So the next one's Summer Rise program. WorkSource Montgomery fully managed this in partnership with MCPS and business leaders in fiscal 18 and the summer of 2017 and summer of 2018. For the summer of 2019, the one coming up, MCPS is handling administratively most of the work, and WorkSource Montgomery, as staff understands it, will be providing technical assistance and still reaching out to businesses to find placements. WorkSource intends to allocate $90,000 of its PEPCO Exelon money for student stipends. Staff just notes that in previous years, the funding was higher than $190,000. WorkSource says MCPS plans to cover the balance. Staff just wants to make sure that all that funding is handled and stipends are handled. And the reason WorkSource Montgomery is handling the stipends is it's just easier for them as a vendor to provide the stipends to students and having MCPS as a public agency providing that funding.
So you want to say, sorry, MCPS, you don't have to pay for this?
I just want to make sure the stipends are covered and that that everyone's made whole where they're supposed to based on the understanding that March 5th occurred for the funding of the program.
So you're just concerned that if we don't stipulate that WorkSource will pay for it, then we're actually not sure if the stipends will be paid for. Is that basically what you're saying?
I believe that's accurate. Yes.
Okay, colleagues, Mr. Chawanda.
And I've had some back and forth, my office with you all. We were gonna do an appropriation. We were told it wasn't needed after Councilmember Rice and I sent a letter to the executive asking for a supplemental for the stipends. And I just, similar to council staff, we raised this. I've been told some different things. I did know the $90,000 from PEPCO Exelon was gonna go to the stipends, and that's always been the case since the beginning, so that's great. So now is what I'm hearing is that the extra money that for the stipends that surpass that amount is going to come from where?
Originally, when I had spoken to Dr. Smith at the school system, he had indicated that he could make up the difference. However, WorkSource Montgomery is dedicated to the success of this program. If that is an issue, we are happy to contribute to the remainder stipends.
Okay, so it sounds, there's a commitment to do it either way. Okay, and where are we right now with the amount of hosts and employers and all that?
So we are right on par with where we were last summer. My understanding is that the hosts have been locked in. There's 400 opportunities, and the students have all registered, and we're in the matching process right now.
Okay, so 400 opportunities, that would mean if the stipend's still $300, that would be $120,000 needed. And so that's coming, 90's from you, so that leaves the $30,000 gap, and you're saying it's not, that's gonna come from either you or MCPS or some combination therein, but you're fine taking the responsibility to
Absolutely, we'll make sure.
back no matter what?
No matter what.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. Let's move on then. Oh, sorry, Mr. Friedson.
Yeah, so in the interest of something I don't do always so well, of knowing what I don't know, I just wanted some clarity on the Exelon money, why that is what, the funding source for this, if I could get some clarity on that. Is it only 90,000? Is there more money that can be accessed? Is that pipeline coming over a certain number of years, and it's specific for that amount for a specific period of time? Could you just explain that to me a little bit?
Sure. In the agreement between the Public Service Commission and when Pepco and Exelon merged, they required to provide a certain amount of money, I can't remember the total, over a 4-year period, which totaled $425,000, and that needed to be implemented by the Workforce Development Corporation, which is WorkSource Montgomery. So the previous administration and WorkSource developed 4 pipeline programs. Summarize was one of them. And so the $425,000 that Pepco Exelon is providing, I believe this is, the fiscal 20 is the last year that we will receive that money, WorkSource will receive that money to fund programs that are with it, including Summarize. But the program money needs to be used for specific purposes, but within that allocation, it was determined by the administration at WorkSource how that 425 was split out.
Got it. So there's 90,000 left. That's it. No more money left in this. That doesn't create an issue for moving forward. And then, is there any reason why? It doesn't seem like a huge difference. $15,000. Was there a reason why that wasn't absorbed? And
It was a matter of the commitment of where our budget was. We'll go back, rearrange programming to make sure this happens.
okay, all right. Thanks.
Okay. Good. We're not. To me, it's a little ambiguous right now. MCPS is going to pay for it, but if they need some help, then you'll pay for it. I don't know how that's really going to work exactly. You're going to have to negotiate with them? What?
Well, all of the funds will be, we handle all the stipends.
So you're just going to handle the stipends?
We'll handle
They won't handle the stipends?
Right, we handle all of those stipends.
Okay, that's not ambiguous.
Right.
Thank you.
In previous years, MCPS transferred money to WorkSource to help support the program, and they do have a commitment, my understanding is from Dr. Smith, but I think it's appropriate that we're hearing today that WorkSource will cover the stipend.
Right. Going into this conversation, Dr. Smith had said they would take care of it, but we are saying, no, we'll take care of it. Okay. Continuing?
Correct. The next item is hire centers. We've talked a lot about that already. Staff will just note that the vision here, and as some council members already noted, is to expand job centers beyond what was originally American Job Center. Staff actually really thinks that's a great idea because it expands opportunities beyond just 2 areas in the county for people to reach. And as noted during the public libraries conversation, we have 21 facilities that are already open for business for lots of reasons, for public to come in, not just for job opportunities. And so the report merely notes what WorkSource will be monitoring, how much they plan to allocate. The only real question is that there was $147,000 that WorkSource received directly through a contract with HHS this year in East County. They plan to use $160,000 for 2.5 FTEs to run the hire centers next year, with or without the money from East County and the HHS budget. So Staff is noting this, that should WorkSource not receive that RFP, or not win the RFP with HHS they'll have $147,000 they'll need to make up through their own budget. And again, they have more than enough in their budget to do that. Staff just is mentioning that to note that where that money will be coming from or not coming from.
Okay. Nancy?
Thank you. On the higher centers, Mr. Fletcher, given the realignment and all the restructuring with the regional services center and the small business centers, et cetera, is that where they're going to be located? Is that part of that synergy?
Is the Business Solutions Group going to be located?
Well, I know that we here had addressed an item that included that the regional services centers were going to have small business support, et cetera. I don't remember the term, but
Right,
I know
so-
that they're going to be used for that. Will these higher centers then be also, is that where they're going to be located?
No, they're going to be located in the regional service centers directly.
The higher centers?
No, the higher centers are located in a separate facility. They're separate from each other.
Right, so my question is, will there be some kind of integration or some kind of interaction between the new functions of the regional services center, since they're geographically, accessible? Has there been any conversations about some kind of alignment or some kind of integration so that we can be strategic in our service delivery?
And there hasn't to this point, but more than happy to explore that.
Great, all right, thank you.
Okay.
If there's nothing else, we can.
Wait.
Oh, sorry.
So I'd like to get a report in terms of because I understand on circles, I think it was referenced before when we were first talking about this in terms of the success numbers, because one of the things that stuck out, you had said something about the hire being at Rockville Library. So I went and looked at Rockville Library's website in terms of, and I saw that it was 2 days that you'll be there, the 14th and the 28th. So, right. So it was only 2 days. I think it seemed as though, I thought you had said it was like twice a week or something like that.
No. So we are every week in Marilyn Praisner. Well, it used to be Marilyn Praisner Library. Now it's the Rec Center since they're renovating the library. And we are in White Oak. The Rockville Library was an addition because more people needed services in Rockville. Okay. So we expanded to include Rockville, and it's based on need. When we see more people coming into the centers at Rockville, we can increase the amount of times that we're there.
How do you do outreach
For the higher centers?
Yes.
So we have a flyer that's available. We are in the library booklet of programs that take place in the library. We put it on our social media. The library puts it on their social media. We have literature that's throughout the community. Various ways that we market it.
Okay, because I've never seen it, and I'm all over social media. And I follow everything. So we'll certainly need to please reach out to my office as well as the Lead for Libraries office so that we can help you to put that out there, because I think that if you're basing your hours on the number of people that come in, and if you're not doing a good job of getting to the folks who need the assistance to know to come in, then it's that vicious cycle of going round and round, and so we don't get to the communities that are unserved. And I especially encourage you to work with our nonprofit communities. I know you're sitting right next to one of the best in the business, being able to outreach and get out there. And so I see all of their notes. So it's one in which it'll be incredibly important, especially as we're dealing with some of our harder to reach populations, to make sure that happens. So what I'd like to ask for is, because this is new, maybe quarterly reports in terms of successes, in terms of the people that you're seeing. And also we need to be tracking repeat. So if a person comes in and then comes back again, that says something, right? That gives us a great synopsis of, well, we're not getting the success that we'd like to have if they are seeing us twice, right? Because then that means that there's something else, and maybe we need to provide more intensive service or whatever the case may be. So those kinds of numbers, as well as the success stories of how many job placements we get, all of those kinds of things quarterly would be incredibly important. Because this is new, it'll be important for us to be able to analyze and follow that. So I
think I made kind of a similar request earlier, but that fine
Oh, I'm
pointing
sorry.
quarterly,
Yes.
but that would be great.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're talking about the hire centers here. And the request is for quarterly reports. All right, to me, this one is really challenging. I mean, if you have to market, if you have to explain to people in the first place that you're there, you're starting, it's such an uphill battle. And I wonder about the incremental value of trying to communicate to people, there is a particular location where all these things can happen, as opposed to, if you need workforce help, we're here, and you come to us where we are. Where are you? You're in Rockville, right? I just worry a little bit about whether we have a realistic expectation about what can be accomplished by creating these satellites. And so these quarterly reports will help us monitor that.
We're responding to our partnership with the library, who said that a big part of their traffic are individuals who are out looking and pursuing jobs.
That's true. If you go,
That's the reason why we created this partnership, because there was already that establishment there.
libraries are job centers.
Right.
That's what people are doing on the computers a lot of the time.
So that's why, that is the reason why we've identified that as the strong partner that we're going forward to. So I do feel that traffic is already there, and we do want to get that word out more, but it really was a response to a
I think
community.
the difference I have is, like, regional centers are not libraries.
Right.
And people aren't in regional centers
That's
looking
right.
for
That's-
jobs.
that's why
They're in libraries.
Right, that's why we're in the libraries, yeah.
So, yeah.
So we'll continue to do that, but our goal was to address the community need and move out to that way based on the data that we had from where the job seekers were going.
Mr. Friedson.
Yeah, I think just to that point, I was wondering about it too. I was looking at the numbers, and unless my math is off, at the East County Regional Center, which we have the most staff time, that's a daily operation, is that right?
So, correct, that is right.
Yeah, so it's one-to-one career coaching, 329 people, which could be, I'm assuming that's not unique people necessarily, or?
Those are unique.
Those are unique individuals, okay. So that's July to February is what it says here, so that's half a year.
And
So that's basically a little less than 2 a day.
we
Or maybe 2 a day if you're talking about 6 days a week or business days.
And in total, with our full East County, including the higher pop-ups, we have 2.5 FTEs. So we are working with the most people that we can with the staff that we have. And so we have one staff that is dedicated there Monday through Friday. Not usually 9 to 5, because we have evening programming as well. We have our trainer that is there providing workshops. The trainer is also going out doing the hire centers. I help go out and do the hire centers. And a lot of the customers that we have in our East County require more intense assistance. We work very closely with HHS there. So a session with a customer might last 10 hours, an hour a week for 10 weeks type of situation. It's not a quick person comes in, they're a great fit for a job, we connect them to
More
the
like
job.
case management is what
It's a
you're saying.
lot more intense case management.
And I totally understand that. So what you're saying is the 2 per day at the East County Regional Center, the about 1.5 per day, if my math is right, at the Burtonsville, and I could go through Rockville too, but that is the capacity. If you wanted to serve more people than those 2 people per day or 1.5 people a day, you'd have to hire more people.
Correct. Because even after our work, so we have very robust workshops, and even after the workshops, we have the participants that stay around, they need additional support. We are helping them on the computer with a resume. We're doing all of these different things. So it does take time with our customers.
Okay, it's a good clarification, and I understand not all programs are created equally, and some are more of a case management wraparound service type, and some are a quick come in for help type, and drop in. The reason why a re-engagement center, for instance, is a much more intensive process, and so I understand that. It seemed like it wasn't a lot, and I would have to learn a little bit more to figure out whether or not we're actually getting the best out of the FTEs that we're utilizing, and whether it makes sense, to Mr. Reamer's point of, how we set this up to be as accessible as possible, but also to have, I think there is certain, something to be said about critical mass and about having all the resources that somebody would need that one person might not be able to provide in a, particular place.
This model was born out of the East County RFP, and that was for $140,000. So that was the total amount of resources. Worksource Montgomery has seen the benefits of that and have expanded that model beyond just the East County, but we haven't been able to allocate as much funding as we had, in that first year. We have made a decision to add some from our operations budget and utilize the talent within each community, and that's where our partnership with Interfaith Works and other partnerships are going on to provide those fundings so that there's a clear established trust programming going on in the libraries and in the communities moving forward on this.
Okay. All right, I think we have lights on. Mr. Rice, okay, we've got all the lights on. Is it okay if I go in this direction? That's fine.
Yeah, start with Council President.
Okay.
Yeah, so going back to the idea of the regional services centers, my point with that is that we have had so many conversations about leveraging resources and how do we also begin to spread the word in our communities that your regional services center is a hub of its services, and therefore I think that just as people automatically go to a library, this should be automatically going to the regional services centers to receive whatever kind of support they require. So that's why, in my opinion, I think that'll be a really effective way to be present. And also, I think secondly, I also want to just stress that I am very impressed with the work that the staff has executed in at Worksource Montgomery. I think that there are real dedicated staff members that understand the needs of the community. Obviously, what we're trying to do is just find the most effective model, and I hope that as we work to do that, that we take into consideration, the incredible task and challenge that those who are doing the frontline work within this organization, how effective they've been. So just wanted to put a point on that. Thank you.
Mr. Jawando.
And to Mr. Friesen's point, I know you're stepping away, but one of the things I discussed with Acting Director Vasello of the libraries was getting numbers on gauging the need of who's coming in and out for these services, because they are often overwhelmed as librarians, like, oh, hey, I need help with a resume or whatever, whatever the need is. They don't have the ability to actually get one-on-one time. So I think assessing that, to your point, that could help us understand what the total scope of need is at libraries where we know many people are coming in, and then we can decide budgetarily. I want to flag that for Jean, just as because you can to libraries as well, and I want to merge those two conversations as we're assessing the need at the libraries vis-a-vis what you're doing at the higher centers in the couple of libraries that you're working in.
Mm-hmm. And real quick, council staff will note that during the Education and Culture Committee, which we realized you weren't able to make that day, that was requested that libraries will come back in the fall once we have a new director, hopefully, to talk about the future of libraries, including workforce development. And so I believe that'll be a great place to segue that to pieces of information.
Let me just put in a plug for when that happens. I don't know if that'll be before this joint committee or not, but why not have video conferencing? I mean, if you could have a couple people in one location and every library is essentially, able to video conference right in and get some basic help at least. I don't know. All right, Mr. Rice.
So, what are the date? Because I know that we don't have all of these stood up yet, right? In terms of the higher center in Germantown, not set up yet, right? Right. Okay. So, what do you anticipate would be the days and hours of operation for our higher center in, for example, Germantown?
Well, one of the things that we did when starting in East County is we did a survey of the community to just find out timeframes. If it's during the day, it's better. A lot of the families that we work with had children, so they rather do things during the day while their children are in school. Some people rather do things in the evening. So we really don't want to put a calendar out there as of yet without assessing the community, the needs of the community.
What are the hours for the one in East County?
In our East County facility, we are Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and on certain Tuesdays of the month, we're there until 7.
And no weekends?
We are there some weekends depending on activities and events that are going on.
So
we
special events you
partnership,
open.
correct. So we work closely with Gilchrist Center there and Montgomery College. So when they have an event that's going on, we come in so we're able to engage and work with those students.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So, continuing.
During our March 5th conversation, a lot was talked about youth programs. WorkSource on page 4 indicates how they plan to allocate $160,000 from their operations budget in fiscal '20 for 3 programs outside of Summer Rise. This is really a copy and paste from WorkSource in terms of their intent for those programs. Given our time, I don't know how deep we want to get into them,
We
but
can today. We just have some major topics we still need to get to.
understood. So I guess my sense of including these was to ensure these programs continue in addition to whatever else the other committee changes have been made.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Strong support to continue these programs.
Yep.
And then similar with the career advancement program, making sure that continues, which WorkSource plans to allocate $150,000 for that in fiscal '20. Again, just expectations are communicated clearly today.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So with that, I think we've covered all, not all, but enough with WorkSource. And we'll make the recommendations, communicate that to council based on what we've gone through today for some of those changes.
Okay, that was fun. It's the work of government. Yes. Okay. Let's proceed.
That's why I keep going like this. You see, I don't like doing crossed arms, but it's like I'm trying to warm up my hands. It's like I keep going. That's crazy. This one should be quick, right? Yeah, this should be easy.
All right. Okay, so
I got you, yeah. I'll give you a call.
Vivian, maybe we can, well, let's proceed.
We probably can get through these pretty quickly.
I didn't want to say that myself, but for fear there's something I didn't know.
So the next item is a recommended capital improvements program amendment for the Department of Recreation. It's for the shared agency booking system replacement. It's a joint collaboration between CUF, Montgomery County Recreation Department, and Park and Planning to improve the efficiency and customer experience by replacing their shared online booking and sales software. The software functions will facilitate registration for activities and programs, membership sales and management, point of sale, admission and product sales, league scheduling and management, reserving facilities and athletic fields, scholarships, and customer payment processes, as well as back-end business operations. For fiscal year '20, the expenditures total $962,000. 613 of that funding comes from the CUF Enterprise Fund. 304,000 comes from Park and Planning. For fiscal year '20, it's a total expenditures of 415,000. 349 will come from the Parks Enterprise Fund, and 111,000. I'm sorry, 349 from the CUF Enterprise Fund, and then 11,000 in the from the Parks Enterprise Fund, for a total project cost of $1,377,000. Basically, the council has heard previously that the ActiveNet software has not been meeting the needs of the departments, and these proposed improvements are needed to ensure proper financial management, refund processing, performance measurement, and reporting.
Okay. Seems like something that we need pretty badly. I'm sure a lot of our residents will appreciate it very much when it's online. Any comments here? When will it be operational?
We're hoping that we can, we're working right now currently on an RFP. Once this is finalized and approved, we can have that out on the street. We're hoping to start a timeline implementation in August and be ready to roll in within a year.
Okay, great. Let's do it. Make it happen. All right. No objection? Approved? Thank you.
Sorry you had to wait here that long for that.
I had a comment, but I refrained.
I'm sure they're happy that they didn't have to.
Next time.
No news is good news. Yeah. It's not warmer up here, I promise.
I think.
Although it may feel that way,
Yeah.
you know.
No, I think they lowered the temperature so that we wouldn't be here for too long, but it's not right.
Try to freeze us out.
I think it was to cool us down. All right, let's go into after-school programs. Now, we have, we met a few weeks ago to talk about the OLO study, and we appreciated that study's finding that low-income communities, the schools in low-income communities often don't have after-school programs or school time programs. A lot of times those are because it's a business, it's an invitation to, a company to come run a business at the school, but if the company can't charge tuition, at a certain level, then the company's not gonna come to the school. And if you have a low-income school, then the families can't afford to pay $200, $300, $400 a month, or whatever it might be, for programs. So there's a real gap. We've been making a lot of progress adding after-school programs over the last 4 or 5 years, adding EBB, kind of inventing a model as we go. That also includes a lot of parent engagement in the EBB program, but there are also less intensive models as well. The back of this packet has, which I don't know if we're really going to have time to do this, but I was hoping we could kind of walk through the menu of options, because that was produced at the request of the Joint Committee. We met and we asked for kind of roadmap, ideas about different ways that you can expand. I think that, perhaps it'll come up in the course of the conversation. There is in the packet some additional proposals. Councilmember Jawando and I have a recommendation to add a number of programs, 3 new EBB programs, 5 new Rec Extra middle school programs, and there is some addition to a previous request from Councilmember Jawando and Hucker around late hours, expanded hours. Although this is a very big topic, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm about the direction that we're going, so why don't we... Did you have, I was trying to... Thank you. Councilmember Navarro has highlighted the need for Wheaton Woods and Sergeant Shriver, which was noted, and I was going to suggest we try to accommodate that in some fashion in the EBB expansions. So why don't I turn it to Councilmember Jawando? Did you want to make some comments here?
Sure. I mean, we can, obviously, glad we were able to partner. I had sent a previous letter about the EBB expansion, but always happy to add my colleague, and I think a lot of us have talked about, even members not on this committee, the need to expand after-school programs and just how we can't do it fast enough. And so I think while this is an incremental approach to add to the rec list, I'm hopeful that I think many of our colleagues agree that these opportunities are critical. We know the research bears that out. And, I'm glad that so many of you have agreed with that. And then I want to thank the school system and rec for working on this list we got today of, where we think the highest need is. And I know those are hard lists to do, especially when you see it, the information that we looked at last time. But so I just appreciate the partnership and look forward to, putting this on the list, and hopefully, we can get several of them off, if not all of them, so.
Great, so why don't we go through the packet?
Oh, okay. So council staff briefed for you various discussions by the committees previous to today's meeting. The council, the Fed committee chair referenced the discussion on OLO. One key thing out of that meeting was the request that key stakeholders come together to develop a strategic plan for expanding after-school programming and basically considering where are the highest needs places, where are resources existing, what quality innovative programs are happening, taking all those things to account to figure out the best places to expand. Again, the joint committee at that time requested a menu of options, which is included at circles 23 to 29 of your packet for expanding after-school options, at least through recreation. The joint committee also discussed the linkages to learning program, and council staff just mentions in the packet that the joint HHS and E&C committee met to talk about the linkages to learning program and possible expansion. Again, there's a request that a strategic planning process take place in the summer to look at sites and where expansion would be best to happen and what kind of models would be good to expand. Also, the Fed committee met on April 26th to review the recreation.
Just pause on that. So you said we'll come back this summer to talk about a more expansive strategy. Right, okay.
Yes. Again, the Fed committee met on the 26th to review the executive's recommended budget for the Recreation Department. There's a couple of items that were included on the reconciliation list that relate to youth programming, so council staff briefed that on page 2 of your packet. 2 tranches of $250,000 to support the Skills for the Future Fund to fund grants and pilot programs that give low-income youth access to high-quality STEAM programming. And then
before we pause you on that one, as Councilmember Friedson just said, he got credit there, but credit is also due to Councilmember Jawando and Councilmember Albornoz. The memo actually was from Albornoz, Reamer, Jawando, but Mr. Friedson was enthusiastic about it.
Sorry, I think I must have
I know, it's okay, it's okay.
the lines, okay.
There's so many enthusiastic council members, it's hard to keep us. Now, the other thing I wanted to comment about this is that, I think the idea here is not unlike McHale or the EDC, to start building a place where we fund this type of programming. And certainly, there's a desire to see the Kid Museum and its programming, but also others. Just doing everything we can to bring low-income kids into the pipeline to get the jobs of the future and to grow our economy here locally through very innovative programming. So that was that item.
Okay.
Ms. Navarre, did you have a comment on this or general? You want to hold for the appropriate time related to the EBB programs, or did you want to talk earlier?
Yeah.
Okay.
The second item was expanded hours at a number of community recreation centers, Wheaton, Good Hope, Long Branch, White Oak, Plumgar, and East County. There was an additional piece that council staff put in. After the meeting, we learned that in order to do the expanded programming piece at those facilities, it would require $60,000 in operation expenses. So the 2 items that are on the reconciliation list are $103,200 for the expanded hours, and then $161,800 to support that high interest activities during the expanded hours.
160? Oh, because you need another 100.
You need another 60, so it was 101,800.
So if we could just flesh that out, because I know we talked about this the other day. The 100,000 was, and we talked about whether this could be a social media. We did all this talk. So just explain to me the additional 60,000.
Sure, I mean, we could certainly open the doors. Yeah, the 161,000 is for the seasonal staff and the operation, so it helps us keep the building open till 11 o'clock with 3 people inside that are seasonal people at that point. But for us, we felt like there had to be a hook to get innovative programming. Midnight basketball, 3-on-3. We had to pay officials, referees. We have to buy T-shirts, provide.
So it was just an expansion. When you started thinking about what could happen,
correct.
You might need another addition into the 100,000. That one person that's going to do that coordinating role across rec centers.
The innovative programming piece needs some operating expenses to help feed it. You have to have a hook to get the kids there.
Okay.
And keep them there in a safe place.
Thank you. So one of the things that I just wanted also to suggest, similarly with what, happened way back in the day at the East County with the youth advisory group that I convened, and then they came up with the proposal of the Teen Escape Club and then the fashion boot camp and all that. It'd be great for you guys to perhaps convene a youth advisory group from that area to kind of get a sense of what they might want in terms of programming. It's really awesome to see the engagement when it's driven by the youth, and just really cool.
Could not agree more. I mean, our most successful events are driven by young people, so absolutely.
Great.
Okay, so let me just make sure we understand, we all understand the financial. So is it 103,000 plus 161 plus 60?
No, it's
No.
103,000 plus the 161,000.
Okay, so the number below, in the second half of that paragraph, the 101.8 and the 60 are not,
They break out.
those two equal the 161.8. Got it.
Initially a program.
Right, we had initially done 103
103 and the 101.
and the 101, so now it's,
60
okay.
for
So it's all packaged, I think it should sort of be reflected on the rec list as a package. Right, it's essentially 264 to expand hours with programming, right?
Well, I had a question on
Isn't
that.
that
I'd like to keep the hours in the programming separate because there is some utility. While I think we should do them together, and I'll be arguing for that, I just would love to know whether you think the 101 and the 103 and the 60 could be broken out, or do you think those are together? Those should be together. So it should be two tranches, one for the hours and one for the programming.
I mean, that would be your call. I mean, obviously.
I'm asking your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, they need to go together
Yeah.
to have the hook to get the kids there.
Yeah.
To keep something innovative and creative. I mean, we've already started brainstorming to council.
I love the idea, by the way, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm here about the advisory council.
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to say, I think it makes sense to do them together. I think it is of less value if they were just opening
I agree.
the centers,
If we've got 5 votes here to keep them on the rec list, I'm happy to keep them together.
Unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way, Councilmember Tawanda. Let me just tell you, as a veteran.
Once the up here it's only adds. Once we have to get the minuses in, I haven't learned that yet, but I'm waiting for the other side of the.
Actually, you learned one of that yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. The one thing that I will say, just to point out, I mentioned to Director Riley afterwards, but just to speak to rec programming and how important it is. I had one of my closest friends at a Montgomery County Recreation Center had his 30th birthday party several years ago. It wasn't that many years ago, but several years ago at Club Friday. No, I didn't say it at the dais. Not at the dais. At Club Friday. So Club Friday theme. So.
Could I just, before we move off this point, because I know that it's horse trading when we get down to it, I do think that there's opportunity, even if the hours were only restored or extended, that community partners could come in and do programming that is at no cost to you.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if my colleagues are listening to this point, but, I think there's a value in separating it into 2 tranches, but the program would be great, but you could imagine if the time was open, I know of many community partners that would come in and utilize the space. Right. Even if, without having now someone would need to coordinate that but you could potentially coordinate that during business hours with your normal staff, potentially, right?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, we can certainly add and partner with folks. I actually ran into somebody on Saturday that's from Unity, and we had a meaningful conversation in the parking lot at Good Hope about the space there as well.
How they could use
But I think there's sometimes barriers to that. So sometimes those private groups that are still nonprofit doing great work aren't always open to everybody coming into the space. And so there's a
trade-off.
Yeah, there's a trade.
So I defer. I'm torn on this. I want them both to happen, but if the chair thinks that it's better to put them together, I'm open to it. But
Well, I think the council members should know that they're related.
yeah,
I'm not gonna force the issue of they must be on the line together, but I think folks should understand that if the hours are on there, you should really think about programming those hours.
Right.
All right, let's put them together then. All right, thank you, Vivian.
Okay.
Okay, so then there's a couple operating budget expenditure issues. One is the annualization of the EBB program at Gaithersburg and Oakview that were added in fiscal year 19 for an amount of $196,100.
Okay, so this is annualization, this is in the budget already? Correct. Okay.
Yes,
I think
correct.
we all agree, all right?
And then there are the proposals to add after-school programming, particularly Councilmember, or Fed Committee Chair Reamer's.
Okay, let me take it from here. So the rec department you've developed a list that kind of assesses conditions at different schools and what schools have EBB, what have rec extra, what have linkages. And have you shared that with everybody, or did my office just, I think this is your document.
We got it.
We've all got it, okay, terrific.
Stand out this morning.
You don't have a copy?
I don't think I have it, so I'll let yours.
Okay.
Somebody came up and passed it out.
So this is just responding to our request to kind of help us think about locations. And so why don't we separate a little bit the question of locations from the overall funding of more locations? And we can just start with the overall funding of more locations. So Councilmember Joando and I have suggested that we add 3 new EBB elementary programs and then 5 new rec extra middle school programs. And the cost of the EBB elementaries is $1.176 million, and the rec extra is $239,000.
I just wanted to jump in here. I think
Thanks.
we need to get updated numbers because typically EBB starts mid-year and there's part of the year spent
Yeah,
to
that's a good
plan it.
point.
And I think what the numbers they gave us on that chart
It's full
are
year.
full year costs. So,
Usually it would be less. What's here?
right, so it would be a portion less. It wouldn't necessarily be half, but we can let OMB and rec.
We would have to come back to you with those numbers. Generally, we start with EBB models in January.
That's right. You start in January.
Now, we hire our staff. Depending on the
Yeah.
numbers that you allocate, we have to get our staff on board to get into the schools, do recruitment, help with parent engagement, start making those hooks a little earlier. But the program hits the ground in January.
And that's what this annualization is the
Correct.
the half year from last year.
That's right.
Well, that's good news.
See, we're cutting already.
Or we're adding more. I don't know.
That's like getting a it's like a 2-for-1 deal where you save half the
Maybe,
money.
maybe we'll be able to add a 4th school. Okay, so well, I think we could talk about adding a 4th student. Okay, we've got, I'm sorry, I'm not able to see the orders, as you know. So Ms. Navarro, followed by Mr. Joando, followed by Mr. Fried.
Thank you so much. Well, I really appreciate that clarification because it was something I had, I'd actually asked my staff because it seemed like it was a lot more than what we had, approved in the past. So now that answers that question. It's one of those things where obviously we all want more after-school programming. So of course I'm not going to, of course I'm going to support what's being proposed. I do think that, again, I've said this before, I think in the past years, I do think that it is going to be critical for us to understand how we can best leverage these investments. I did a real quick calculation, and if we were to provide this level at this cost, now I know it's going to be a little less, but to high and mid farm schools, 47 elementary schools, that's like $18 million. And so, so I'm trying to here be as structural and as, focused on scalability as possible versus it's great that we got 2 schools, yay, but, the need is quite incredible. I mean, this is just high and mid farms. If we went to high, mid, and mid-low farm rates, it'd be $30.8 million. And so the reason why we have this OLO report, the reason why we've had all these conversations here, it's basically to have some kind of a framework or blueprint where we are not saying, let's do EBB with all of these components and make it so expensive that we are just symbolically doing something. So to the extent that work can take place, I'm asking for this again, to look at these models, and if we're going to talk about, let's say, parental engagement, and that's a component, couldn't we find a way to leverage, let's say, a parent coordinator, parental engagement coordinator that can do work in several schools? Can't we leverage, economies of scale and come back with a proposal that says, hey, if you guys want to invest, I don't know, $2 million, you're going to get to these many schools under this particular model that now we're leveraging what we've learned, the lessons learned. And this is the conversation we had. I remember when AIM was asking us for the Dream Academy, it was that, yeah, it's a wonderful model. Why don't we test it and then see how we can take components of that model, realign it, and then look at the cost? Because this is cost prohibitive. Let's just call it what it is, right? And so I'm not interested in coming every year and patting myself on the back and saying, yay, we added 2 more elementary schools, because the need is great. So I'm just asking again, would it be possible for some work to occur, just like we asked for Languages to Learning this summer? Now that we have these, models in place, and I'm so happy that we're addressing the elementary school level, because that had been sort of a thorn on my side for a long time. But now that we have some lessons, can we then see, right, how can we leverage, how can we look at economies of scale instead of each particular program having all these separate components? Couldn't we say, hey, we're going to focus in this area of the county, you can share resources or staff in this way, you can share programmers in this way, whatever it is. I know there's some that are non-negotiable, but that way we can get more bang for our buck, because this is not sustainable, right? So that's the comment that I will make. We'll see what happens during reconciliation. I appreciate the chart. I do, I had pointed out Wheaton Woods and Sergeant Shriver, because they were at the very bottom of in the list in terms of farms rate. There were 83.3% for Wheaton Woods farms, and Sergeant Shriver, this is from the OLO report, 82.7. So that's why I identified those. But I'm open to the chart that has been put forth in terms of how to identify those schools. And lastly, within that conversation or that work to identify a possible framework, can we also identify those community-based programs, such as the Gator program, which is a partnership between MHP and Arcola Elementary School and Pembridge Apartments, and also see that as a possible model that we should consider? Because that way you're braiding funding, and so it's not as expensive, but wow, the outcomes are extraordinary. So what if we identified areas in the county where you might have, low-income apartment complexes like these that can then house the program? I think we gave them $150,000. They're serving a lot of children, and the parental engagement is extraordinary, right? So here's another model that we could then expand, and it's not as expensive as this, with the same outcomes, with an amazing collaboration with the school system. I'm very interested in that type of approach as much as possible.
Yeah, I agree. And based on your recommendation, we did a site visit and had a nice visit and a nice discussion. They're actually coming to tour EBB with us
Very cool.
in the next week. So their model is a little different than ours, because they're in 2 different sites. They do have a 21st Century grant as well to help them. But it was a great visit, and we appreciate the connection, and hopefully they'll see our connection as well.
Right, yeah, I just don't want to be stuck in one, way of delivering. If the outcomes are the same or better, why not look at those innovative approaches? And the fact that it's in the community also provides for a much more robust parental engagement, because it's right there in their apartment complex, so that's another really great thing.
And I think also building on that concept of looking at different approaches, we had put in the chart the possibility of a Rec Extra elementary school proposal, which we understand that not all communities are created equal, and not all need the same level of support for out-of-school time, where the Rec Extra is making sure that there are club-based opportunities like extracurricular, expanding upon that for schools, and that is a more affordable option. And we do understand that some communities need the more comprehensive EBB model, and so hopefully we can continue to build out that menu of options depending on what service level that we hope to provide at different schools.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, as well as like a triage model And again, I'll just say for the record, because I've said this before, I am not opposed to Rec Extra, but that's why I would like for us to have a framework. Because for those communities that have more intense needs, I would rather us than invest there to get the best outcomes. And for those that may not, then maybe a Rec Extra is awesome. My kids would have loved to be in a Rec Extra type environment that didn't need obviously as much. But we know that there are certain geographic areas based on these high farms charts that will need a more comprehensive. And that way we can be very strategic about how we're spending those dollars. So I do hope that there could be some kind of a work group that can bring this back to us next year as we roll all this out. But I appreciate the work of my colleagues putting together this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you, Director Riley, talk to us about the framework that you used and the list of schools and just talk us through the schools? Adrian.
So several years ago, we created what we refer to as a strategic program index, where we worked with County Stat. So I have to give a tremendous amount of credit to County Stat and Thomas Tippett, who helped me update the strategic program index recently for this school year. So we look at quantitative indicators and qualitative indicators. And some of the quantitative indicators include percent of students receiving free or reduced meals, percentage of students that are within limited English proficiency subgroups, percent of grade 3 students that did not meet expectations on PARCC assessments. Some of the qualitative factors include if there's a presence of an after-school provider. One of the things that we know it's really important going into a school with a comprehensive program is there space available. We hear repeatedly that the schools want more physical activity. And if you don't have the space to do that, they think that helps kids, particularly going into testing. We're hearing that from our principals now. Whether or not the school is a Title I designation, the presence of other school-based resources such as linkages to learning, and also, which was key, is there a continuum of positive youth resources, meaning is in that elementary school, are they going to go on to an EBB or a Rec Extra middle school program? Because we know the longer we can keep a young person with us, the greater the transformational gains. And to build on that could be an important factor. And so we looked at that, and then what we did on the chart that you have in front of you, you'll see a note that mentions the OLO report. And so we looked at the schools that had the fewest amount of bookings as well and tried to take that in consideration with the strategic program index. And we came up with a sort of short list of schools that should be considered to place resources into, and based on all of these factors. One of the things that's interesting in the OLO report, it mentions that schools with higher enrollment actually had a higher number of bookings. And one of the things that we were able to look at in our strategic program index was County Stat ranked it for me with a straight ranking based on all of these factors, but also they did a ranking that was weighted by enrollment. So taking into consideration the OLO report, I would have to say that the schools with smaller enrollment actually saw fewer opportunities during out-of-school time. So we tried to look at all of these things, overlay those factors, and come up with a short list that you have in front of you.
Thank you. It's really helpful to have you sorting through all of these different variables and helping to prioritize the best way to make investments. You mentioned earlier that you were sort of, several of these say EBB or Rec Extra, or is it and, or is it or? What do you have in mind there?
So on the chart in front of you for the continuum, I believe that the elementary school feeds into possibility of 3 middle schools, and some of them you'll see examples that say like Argyle, Loiterman, Parkland. So Argyle and Loiterman are EBB schools, and Parkland is a Rec Extra.
Program continuum is what is existing at the middle school.
What is existing at the middle school, correct.
Right, okay. Okay, great. So I am remembering now, of course, that the mid-year start, significantly reduces the cost. So, we were at like 1.4, but we can that'll come down a lot. We may be able to add some more schools. Let's go through colleagues. I've got Mr. Duando, Mr. Rice, and Mr. Friedson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for the list. It's so funny, when Councilmember Navarro was talking, I was thinking about deja vu, which I know she has a lot because she's said these things for years, but I'm like, it was my first instance of it. I think last week or whenever we took this up, we said, can we have this comprehensive approach? And I know I made a comment about there's all these schools, there's all this need, and she's been saying that for many years. And I think, so this list is a great start of kind of that assessment that I think we need in all 207, right? Or 206, 207 coming. And not only what's there, but I imagine that there's another line of, which I said last time, of what could be, like what are those tailored needs, in the level of services. And we don't have to call it a program. You could if you want, but more of like what is needed at the school. I think it would be a great investment of time and energy to have an assessment in every school. And you can start with the high need schools, but, in the ones that are identified in OLO report, for example, of, what's there and what we think the needs are. It may take some time to do, getting in with the principal, getting in with the community and all that. But I just think that would be so helpful to you and to us, and maybe you have a version of this already, Dr. Bryce, but to really get to what the council president's talking about, how do we then start allocating dollars, realizing that it's going to be different programs, different needs at each school. And so I'd be really excited to see that or build upon that if we already have something.
So we actually are in discussion with our partners at HHS, right? So this is back to the linkages to learning discussion, the cluster model discussion. It would be helpful countywide if we were able to actually map all of the resources as it relates to recreation, the mental health, the school-based, community-based, so that we could then see those places where there may be an abundance of resources and supports for our young people, and those places where we also might see a lack of resources, so that we could then, in a more strategic way, target and develop the plan over a number of years, how we would layer in additional resources. So it is something that we're looking at initially for the linkages, the wellness centers, the school-based health centers, but I think adding this component, would be helpful.
Like, is that a plan to happen? Like, how do we, what's the?
I know that we're having the
talking
initial
about it?
discussions, right? I know that we're gonna come together this summer, but I do think that maybe a more global alliance of countywide agencies would be really helpful with some of the folks from county stat who do such great work. I think could really be helpful for all of us.
I was also going to add the Collaboration Council too, because they've done a lot of mapping and they do systems work in youth development.
I was just going to add that, and also the Children's Opportunity Fund. We're just having the same conversation, so I think it's very timely, and I think it's important work. Yeah.
It has been done before, like when the Kennedy Cluster Project was first conceived, that was that particular work, and that's how we were able to identify the gaps. So the model is there. This would be awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, that was just going to be my point. And I, if we have money to add more, great. But I also share the urgent need to assess and allocate in a way so that we can get to more as quickly as possible.
Right. I mean, we certainly want you to come up with the most cost-effective models. Like other council members, I've been talking about this issue for a long time. I've been advocating for universal after-school programming, and we're never going to get there without an understanding of, as you said, mapping all those existing resources so that we know how to prioritize our investments. I think what REC has been able to do here is help to prioritize our investments by assessing a list of schools, and I think we need to grapple with how much money we have. Continuing down the list here, Mr. Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And so let me just try and be very quick about this. I'm very supportive of the expansion. I just think that, again, we need to make sure that we're reflecting geographic diversity as well. What I will see from this list that was presented to us is that they're all down county and East County. The reality is that when I look at Watkins Mill Elementary School, who has the exact same makeup, 80% farms, 50% East Hall, 95% children of color, it's exactly the same as what I see with Kent Mill Elementary School. So I'm not sure why it's just a notable and not on the list. Yeah, Adrian, if you could just let me know.
Sure, and that's based on on how they fall in the ranking, taking into mathematical consideration of all of those factors. But I thought that it was important to mention on the list, right? Because it was a community that we know, and it was right up in there. It wasn't far out, and it had other factors that we need to take in consideration, like the need of the community that maybe isn't reflected statistically in the math, and so that's why it was definitely mentioned.
Yeah,
And could I just mention, back to that point about the need of the community, I think when we're looking at that particular school, when you mention this idea of a continuum of support for students over a period of time that would keep them engaged in positive activities as they get older, so that they're not getting into the type of activities which would lead to law enforcement intervention, I think cannot be overstated, especially for that particular community.
Well, yeah, so, I mean, in that instance, I mean, Watkins Mill High School, I mean, our school resource officer, sirs there, because we actually have two, are very busy. So from that standpoint, I mean, it's the reason why we have, Watkins Mill students who actually walk kids home from school through our recreation department, so thank you. So, again, we just need to be very careful about how we're creating these lists and making sure that they're reflective of some of those things. And I know you just based it on some of that, and it's not a criticism, it's just, we just need to be very careful about that. So when we get to the time frame, I'll be pushing for us to have one of those be Watkins Mill Elementary School.
Okay, terrific. Further comments here?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to the comprehensive nature of this. I think we can have a robust discussion of what needs to be included in that, but I think credit to Council President Navarro for really pushing this, and I know we talked quite a bit last time, and there are some different approaches. Everybody sees the value of this program, and Dr. Bryce and Ms. Clutter, we've working together with the Collaboration Council and others, and Ms. Riley, all the work that you've done, and Gabe and I have really focused on it as well. And I see we have some of our AIM advocates and some of the other advocates in the community who've really been pushing this to the forefront to make sure that we are providing the funding, and the council pushing the OLO report to be talking about these issues. A lot of this work, I think, is coming to a head, and credit my colleagues for bringing the proposal forward. And it's good news that we can either have a higher likelihood of being able to get all of this into the reconciliation list, or maybe even we'll be able to squeeze out a few more schools. But I think the bigger and more important aspect of this is being able to be thoughtful and comprehensive about how we do it. And I think, oftentimes with reconciliation list projects, it's one council member who has a somewhat parochial interest and wants something that is not as comprehensive. And in this case, I think we're taking a really, thoughtful look at it, where it's really, we're saying, hey, if we have the will to put in more money, what is the best way to utilize that money and allow you and the department to, help to drive that with transparency and accountability to the public, which I just think is the right approach, and a really good and sound and thoughtful approach. And appreciate the collaboration of everybody and the advocacy of everybody and all the work that is taken to get here. So I'm happy and enthusiastic to support it.
All right, so I'd like to amend my earlier proposal that I made with Mr. Jawando and propose 4 EBBs and 8 rec extras. The rec extras being targeted towards middle school. We'll get a revised fiscal estimate on those. Does that sound good? All right, thank you.
I just also wanted to make a point that the totals for these programs include transportation costs, which would be through MCPS. So I'm wondering if those appropriations need to be made directly to MCPS rather than included in the Recreation Department budget.
So I was actually speaking with our folks in transportation this morning, and so we can do it 2 ways. We can either, the appropriation can go to Rec and Parks, and then we could bill Rec and Parks if that's easier, or the appropriation could come directly to us. So we could actually do it either way.
I think we probably prefer to keep it at rec.
Yeah.
If that's all good.
Right, but as long as it's included, right,
Thank you for preparing, right. Thank you for preparing so thoroughly for this discussion. Okay, now let's talk about locations. Mr. Dwanda.
I just appreciate all my colleagues' comments, and particularly Councilmember Rice. I would agree that, I would just note that I think we should look to include Watkins Mill as one of the elements. I know we're going to get there.
Yeah,
but
you're jumping the gun.
Yeah, I'm jumping the gun, but I want to add on to that. And to Councilmember Friesen, there is a will here on the council to, I'm literally right here, to put the money on the rec list. So here you go, there you go. There you go.
That's what happens
All
when
hands on deck.
committee meetings go.
I got to turn Andrew into a verb somehow.
Okay, so let's talk about schools. You know, to be completely clear, like the budget, is the budget language, do we include specific schools?
We don't need to, and actually, one of the things I was wondering whether we might do is to kind of condition the appropriation on having the strategic work group come together to decide, you know, where are the schools that have the most needs, and how do we address that? And then identify then to the council before expenditures are made, what they're going to do.
I have a concern about that, because when does that happen? I feel like if you're going to get this program open in January, then we need to start moving. Like, it's time to go. We don't have time for, you know, we've got, I think that's a good idea to have that discussion, but I think we should proceed now. If we've got a list of schools from rec, they've already done that strategic mapping. Why would we wait? What's the benefit?
Because, well, I'm just going to jump in. Certainly rec has come up with various factors to consider and work with county staff. But again, if we're talking about stakeholders and kind of looking at particular schools and what's there, I think that there could be a more robust look at, and that might inform the decision. So for example, Watkins Mill is really the school that has the highest ever farms of that whole list. And maybe it's not farms, right? But I think those are kind of the discussions that maybe, you know, could be had in a larger context.
I mean, Watkins Mill is good. Let's do Watkins Mill. Like, I think everybody would like to do Watkins Mill. You know, why wait?
Well, is there a time, and I'd love to hear your. What's the timeline? I mean, can we do it? I like the idea. Like, for example, was MCPS, did they work with you on this list? No, right? So, I mean, I'm assuming there need to be some input on that. So as long as we can get it going in January, I'm sensitive to the Councilmember Reamer's point, but I do think it makes sense to try to have a little bit of that analysis and collaboration done first. Additionally to what you've already done, which is great.
Yeah, and I think this gets us at a great starting point, and we can identify schools that we're very interested in, and then follow-up conversations need to be had, and we need to make sure that, I think this is where the qualitative factors really come into play. Sitting down with MCPS and going over school environment and going over all of the things that we want to consider that, you know, don't fall in like farms rates and all of those other factors. But I think to identify some schools that we're very interested in targeting, and then having those conversations to find out if we want to firm those up or maybe look at a different option.
So can you be sure that we're going to open in January with the programs, and this isn't, you know, I think that's the important factor here. Ms. Navarro, come.
I would just like to channel my colleague, Gabe Albornoz, who has said time and time again that having a robust relationship with the schools is a major factor in the success of these programs. And so that conversation really does have to take place. And I assume that knowing that, you know, that we put the money there, it's major motivation for the parties to get together very quickly. I mean, this is really good work right now. It's not as if you're starting from scratch, but I want to be sensitive to that issue and honor my colleague, Gabe Albornoz, who always says that much more eloquently than I just
him
said.
as well. And I think it's critical. I mean, we just had a great meeting yesterday with a group of roundtable of principals that are with current EBB. So having that engaging conversation to make sure we're addressing all of their concerns is important work. And we can certainly work collaboratively and get back to you quickly with sort of a menu of considerations that we think are ideal, so that you can bless that in some way, and we can certainly hit the ground running in January. For us, it's just summer becomes intense, as you might imagine. So the work is, we have to do it quickly.
So we're not going to form an official group or anything, but you're going to sit down with MCPS, the rec department, outside groups, and this, we may want to formalize an official group in the future. I'm not saying we don't, right? I'm just saying, like, let's move quickly here. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and the one other thing I would just add is MCPS and the Department of Rec are great partners. We talk probably once a week about something that's taking place, just making sure that things are being resolved. And so the fact that they have actually identified schools that they're interested in is an initial step, but it's not the culminating step. And so we knew that we were going to get together and have a conversation about, so tell me all the factors that are taking place in a particular school. We like this school, but is this school ready? It may be a situation if the school is undergoing construction. We may choose to delay implementation until post-construction just because they may not have enough room or things like that. So there are a number of considerations.
Okay, that's good. All right, so we'll hear from you subsequently about your recommendations. I don't know that it has to be in time for the budget decision because it's not contingent, but you'll be working on that urgently, and we totally concur. Okay, does that resolve? Yep. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Back here shortly.